Have you ever been hurt by your parents' favoritism? At the same dinner table, the father would ask after his frail, often ill youngest daughter, checking whether she was feeling any better. The mother would remind her to take her medicine on time, her voice thick with concern. The eldest son would prepare thoughtful gifts for the obedient little sister and the mischievous little brother. The whole family laughed and talked, every face glowing with happiness. Every face except Karina's. She was her parents' daughter, her brother's sister, and the elder sister of the two youngest children. She was also a terminally ill young woman with only 1 year left to live. Yet the family living under the same roof had no idea, and of course, they had never cared. She might as well have been a stranger among them. They all sat at the same table. But between Karina and her family stood an invisible wall. That wall was built of favoritism and neglect, and it shut her out completely. Watching her family laugh together, Karina quietly set down her cutlery, excused herself by saying she felt unwell, and walked straight out of the room that caused her so much pain. Yet even as she closed the dining room door behind her, not one member of her family asked her a single question. It was then that she understood. They truly did not care about her at all. It hurt, but she comforted herself the way she always did. "It's fine, I got used to this a long time ago." Then, without warning, she staggered and collapsed to the floor, retching uncontrollably. Her condition had worsened again. Only a few days earlier, the doctor had told her that her organs were slowly failing. She had contracted a rare condition known as the artist's disease, and she had at most 1 year left. The doctor urged her to make the most of her remaining time and spend it with her family. Karina had only smiled bitterly. For as long as she could remember, nothing she said had ever mattered to anyone. No matter what happened, she was always the one her parents cast aside. So she never told her family about her illness. Instead, she quietly began planning to leave the place that had brought her so much sorrow. For as long as she could remember, whenever her needs conflicted with those of her siblings, she was the one who had to give way. When her little brother tried to take the only birthday present she had, and she dared to object, her mother scolded her sharply. "Your brother is little. He doesn't understand. Can't you give in to him as his older sister?" When her elder brother's class reunion clashed with her birthday party, her father ordered her to postpone her birthday because she was the younger one who stayed home all year, and she should defer to the brother who was rarely there. And when her little sister's plans conflicted with hers, she had to yield to the delicate girl because she was healthy and her sister was ill. Karina had tried to fight back once. She went to her mother while running a fever from a cold, hoping to be coaxed back to her room and, just for a moment, to be loved. But when a servant mentioned that her little sister was also unwell, she was set aside once again. "Karina, you're the older sister. You can stay in your room by yourself, can't you? Besides, it's only a fever. It's nothing serious, is it? Your sister is sickly. As her older sister, you need to give way to her." Abandoned again and again, Karina finally understood. Her parents' tenderness would never belong to her. She began to close off her heart, and by the age of 10, she had stopped longing for anyone's love. So when she learned she had only 1 year left, she chose to say nothing. She wanted to be like the white doves outside her window and leave this sorrowful place with whatever time she had left. She no longer wanted to fake a smile when she was hurting, or to be praised for being mature, or to keep swallowing her feelings. She wanted to spend her last months doing the things she actually wanted to do. But she had no idea where to go. Lost in thought, she murmured to herself, "I only wish there were someone who truly cared about me. Whether they liked me or hated me wouldn't matter." Then suddenly she thought of someone. At her engagement ceremony, one man had seen through the reluctance written all over her face, and he had said to her with a teasing edge, "You look like a puppet on strings. If you don't want this engagement, then say so. Not that I wanted either." Those words had been laced with mockery, and yet they had given Karina something she had never felt before. The sense that someone had noticed her. It was the first time anyone had cared how she felt, and even with the barb attached, she was drawn to it like a moth to a flame. And this was a complete stranger she had met only once. Her own parents had never asked her opinion before deciding the course of her entire life. And later, when her sister felt unwell, neither of them even attended the engagement banquet. So Karina began preparing at once. She would exchange her gold coins for smaller currency, pack a few simple changes of clothes, and yes, bring the documents to dissolve the engagement. That was the one bargaining chip that might let her stay there. and before she left, she would need to see a doctor for medicine to keep her condition stable. The thought left her feeling hollow. She no longer craved her family's affection, and yet she had missed breakfast that morning and not a single person had come looking for her. Sometimes she wondered how they would react if she told them the truth. They would probably treat her like a burden and quietly deal with it. She shook her head and reminded herself that none of it concerned her anymore. She had 1 week to prepare before leaving this cold house behind. She even wrote out a packing list for running away. But on the day she went out to buy supplies, she ran into someone. He was the family physician for everyone in that house except her. His name was Norton, and he was also the man Karina had once loved. Later, she would learn that the feeling had been entirely one-sided, but more on that shortly. The reason they crossed paths that day was that it was her sister's weekly checkup. Because the youngest daughter had been sickly since birth, even the family physician gave her his full attention. Karina, the terminally ill, healthy one, had to seek treatment outside the house. Just as Karina was trying to slip away, her sister came bounding down the stairs and threw herself into her arms. The impact twisted Karina's ankle. The doctor beside them rushed forward to steady her as she fell backward. But he was not worried about Karina at all. He was worried that her sister, Abelier, might get hurt. Abelier, meanwhile, thought nothing of it. She simply trusted that her sister would catch her. Seeing how little her sister cared, Karina muttered something under her breath. It was only then that Dr. Norton realized the obedient, well-behaved Lady Karina was not quite what everyone assumed her to be. Feeling the doctor's strange gaze, Karina quickly recovered and changed the subject, urging her sister to cooperate with her examination. Abelier looked thoroughly unwilling. She still wanted to go out and play with her sister, but Karina refused firmly, because if anything happened to Abelier outside, their parents would place the blame squarely on her. It had happened before. Karina had been painting in her room while her sister played with a fruit knife she had taken from the table. When their mother discovered it, she stormed in and berated Karina, who had known nothing about it, accusing her of being irresponsible and failing to look after her sister. That was why Karina refused so firmly this time. Turned down, Abelier grew despondent. She envied her sister so much. Karina could go out every day, and their parents never stopped her. Yet those words struck Karina as bitterly ironic. She was the one who longed for her parents' love, and she was the one who had given up so much for her sister. Abelier had been frail since birth, and Karina, as her older sister, had turned down every social invitation in order to care for her. As a result, she did not have a single friend. She became the perfect older sister to her siblings, the obedient, dutiful daughter in her parents' eyes, and to everyone else, an unremarkable young lady. At one family banquet in particular, guests visiting the Count's estate had described the household's children to Karina in glowing terms. There was Arrow, the eldest son, so exceptional. Then Pelton, the younger brother, so lively and outgoing, always surrounded by friends. And the youngest, Lady Abelier, with her magnificent golden curls and eyes like jewels. Then they came to Karina. But the Karina they described was simply the plain young lady who spent her days trailing after Abelier. So when Abelier said she envied her, Karina wanted nothing more than to get out of that house. When her sister asked for meat skewers, Karina agreed at once. But once she was outside the estate, she began blaming herself. How could she be jealous of her own sister? What a poor excuse for an older sister she was. She did not have her elder brother's learning, or her younger brother's charm, or her sister's beauty. In everyone's eyes, she was utterly ordinary. The truth was exactly the opposite. Karina had possessed an extraordinary gift for painting since childhood, and she could wield the power of miracles, giving life to the creatures she drew. Karina had been astonished by it. She rushed to show her parents her painting, but at that moment they were celebrating the news that Arrow would graduate early. Karina joined in, praising her brother sincerely, and then held up her painting for them to see. Her mother spared it one indifferent glance, before turning away to discuss with her father how best to throw Arrow a celebration. Neither of them noticed the hurt on Karina's face. After that, Karina never showed her work to her family again. Painting became her refuge. Whenever she was unhappy, she painted, and the creatures in her paintings would be granted brief life. They were connected to her heart, and for a little while, they could heal the wounds inside her. What Karina did not know then was that using that power so often was draining her own life away. By the time she realized it, it was far too late. She had 1 year left. The doctor urged her to stop using the power of miracles so she might live a few more years. If she wanted to survive, she had to stop painting. Karina refused. Giving up painting was impossible, because it was the only comfort she had in this world. On her way home, Karina caught the smell of grilled skewers and remembered her promise to bring some back for her sister. She stopped at the stall and carefully picked out 2 of the best ones. What she could not have imagined was that those 2 skewers would earn her yet another unjust scolding from her parents. All she had done was bring her sister the food she asked for, and for that her father woke her in the middle of the night to shout in her face, "Karina, did you buy Abelier food from a street stall? Don't you know she can't eat things from outside? Do you have any idea that she's been vomiting ever since? And she's now severely dehydrated? You're her older sister. How can you care so little about your own sister?" Her mother chimed in from beside him. "Karina, your father is right. You're an adult now. How can you still be so careless?" Karina tried desperately to explain, but her father's shouting crushed her words before they could form. She fell silent, telling herself over and over to endure it. They were only worried about Abelier. If she just apologized, it would blow over quickly. And after something like this, of course they would blame her. But why do they only treat me this way? I didn't do anything wrong. Why do I have to be the one who gives in? How long am I supposed to keep enduring? Until the day I die a year from now? Will they finally understand me once I'm gone? At that thought, something in Karina's eyes turned hard. She would not swallow it anymore. She would not keep giving way. In that moment, she became someone else entirely. She looked her father in the eye. "So? You've said all this to me. What exactly do you want me to do?" Her father was stunned by the force of it. He could not believe that the meek Karina had suddenly become so unyielding, and for a moment he had no idea what to say. Then a wave of humiliation swept through him. His authority as head of the household had been challenged. He scowled and lashed out. "Is that any way for an older sister to speak? Setting the facts aside, are you telling me you did nothing wrong? Abelier is vomiting and dehydrated, because you don't care enough about your sister." Karina found her father's twisted logic exhausting. Setting the facts aside, if the facts were off the table, then what was left to argue about? She pushed back again firmly. "I don't believe I did anything wrong. No one told me Abelier couldn't eat that food. I assumed she was well again, which is why she asked me to get it for her. And Dr. Norton was there at the time and said nothing to stop me." Her mother and her brother Pelton were both stunned by that. Her mother burst out, "Karina, how dare you speak to your father like that?" Looking at their shocked faces, Karina found it almost laughable. Was she not even allowed to defend herself? Was she supposed to suffer in silence and apologize meekly, as she always had, and call that normal? Faced with her mother's moral outrage, Karina held her ground. "Was anything I said wrong? It was only a suggestion for my sister's health. And by every rule of etiquette, my conduct was perfectly proper. I even tasted the food from the stall myself and confirmed there was nothing wrong with it before buying it for her. I'll be more careful about this in the future, but I'd ask that you also let Abelier take some responsibility for herself." Her father had no answer. He simply said, "Understood, fine, just be more careful from now on," and turned to leave. Her mother and Pelton hurried off to check on Abelier. But before he left, her father turned back. "You know your sister has been sickly since she was small. You may not want to hear this, but you're perfectly healthy, so I'd ask you to be understanding." And so Karina, a dying woman with a year to live, was deemed far healthier than her chronically ill sister. She had been wrongly accused, and now her mother was asking her to forgive her father. Your father only reacted that way because your sister collapsed. From beginning to end, neither of them ever admitted they were wrong. They accused her unjustly and then demanded that she understand them, that she understand her family. But who was going to understand Karina? She called out to her parents as they were leaving. "Is that everything you wanted to say?" Her father turned back, puzzled. "Is there something else we should be saying?" Hearing that, Karina smiled bitterly. "So you do still remember where my room is, father? It's been years since either of you came to see me. I'd assumed you had forgotten me long ago. Please tell Abelier that I'm sorry about tonight. I'm very tired now, so I'll be going to bed." And with that, the whole absurd scene came to an end. But to the very last moment, the apology and the concern Karina was waiting for never came. 3 days passed after that confrontation, For 3 days, she did not appear at the dinner table, and her parents never came to check on her. Only her sister, once she had recovered, came with Pelton to apologize. Her brother was sorry for staying silent while their parents berated her in the middle of the night. Abelier cried as she apologized for selfishly asking her sister to bring her food from a street stall. But what good is an apology after the fact? It is like a wall that has been driven full of nails. Even when the nails come out, the holes remain forever. Even so, Karina chose to go to the dining room to see her family one last time. All this time she had been preparing, and everything she needed for the journey was ready. Today was the day she would leave this house of sorrow behind. At the table, Karina's place was surrounded by every kind of meat. But as a terminally ill patient, the only thing she could eat was salad. No one had ever bothered to learn what she liked. Her father spoke from the head of the table. "Karina, your birthday is in 2 days, isn't it? Your brother Arrow happens to be on leave then, so we could all go on a picnic together. Would you mind postponing your birthday?" It was phrased as a question, but his tone was closer to an announcement, because deep down he was certain his obedient, dutiful daughter would agree. And he was right. Karina agreed. In truth, if her father had not mentioned postponing it, Karina would have forgotten how long it had been since she last celebrated a birthday. She agreed to move her birthday, but she declined the family picnic, saying she had matters to attend to. She was leaving that very day, so of course she had no time for a picnic. Her father, however, assumed she was sulking over the postponement and refusing the family outing out of spite, so he scolded her once again for being inconsiderate and self-centered. Karina had long since gone numb to it, and she readily accepted the blame. "Yes, I'm sorry. That's the kind of person I am. I apologize to all of you. I hope you enjoy yourselves. I'll go back to my room once I've finished eating." With that, Karina walked out of the dining room without looking back. But once she was in her room, the grief caught up with her. This would probably be her last birthday, and they had never once treated it as something that mattered. They spoke as though they already knew she would agree, and not one of them offered so much as an apology. Why did even her final memories have to be like this? In the end, Karina left nothing behind but a letter and walked out of that cold house. With 1 year left to live, she finally left the cold house behind, left behind the parents who played favorites, left behind the family who did not care for her, and set out on the first and last solo journey of her life. She paid for a carriage out of the capital, got off partway and walked for a stretch, and finally traveled with carriages and merchant caravans. After 2 months in total, she arrived in the territory of her fiancé, Lord Milan Phaedos, Duke of Zandota. Along the way, she felt the vitality of spring, the shimmering waters of summer, and the rich harvests of autumn. It was all so beautiful that every hour brought her some new delight. Her fiancé, Duke Milan Phaedos, was considerably less delighted. When he learned Karina had arrived, he shot up from the documents he had been reviewing and marched outside, visibly furious, complaining loudly the entire way. "The nerve of that woman! Engagement or not, she can't simply turn up on my doorstep without so much as a word of warning." The butler, trailing behind him, coughed softly, gently suggesting the Duke mind his language. But the Duke's mouth was running like a machine gun with no intention of stopping. "As it stands, I have to stockpile grain for the winter and prepare for the monster attacks. Where exactly am I supposed to find the time to look after some delicate noble lady?" The more he talked, the more worked up he became, and the butler behind him coughed harder and harder, as though he were trying to bring up a lung. At last the Duke had enough. He stopped and turned to face the coughing man. "Is something stuck in your throat? Tell me, do you think it's too late for me to call off this engagement?" "Not at all." Karina's voice came from directly behind him. Only then did it dawn on Duke Milan. Had she heard every word he just said? Behind him, the butler could only sigh in despair. There was simply no helping this man. Her fiancé had just demanded to her face that they call off the engagement, and she agreed without a trace of anger. She even produced the annulment papers she had prepared in advance. All she asked was that he let her stay for a while, and she added that she did not need to live in the manor itself. Any small house in a quiet corner would do. Duke Milan could make no sense of it. But then he took in her worn, threadbare clothes, and he thought he understood. "Is your family in some kind of financial difficulty?" The question left Karina completely bewildered, until she noticed where the Duke's eyes had settled, on her filthy clothing. She hurried to explain that she had dressed that way deliberately, for fear of running into trouble on the road. The Duke pressed a hand to his forehead in exasperation. Couldn't you have contacted me in advance? What possessed you to travel that far alone? Karina fell silent at those words, which sounded like a scolding, but were nothing but concern. It was the first time anyone had worried about her safety. She recovered quickly. Because this may well be the first journey of my life. And also the last. After all, her life was almost over. Duke Mullane thought nothing of it. As far as he was concerned, a noble lady would simply never get another chance at such an adventure. Looking at her dazed expression, the perpetually stern Duke felt an unfamiliar urge to tease her. He walked toward her in long strides. And if I told you that you couldn't stay here, what would you do? Karina gave the question serious thought. If you don't intend to take me in, then I'd join a merchant caravan and do odd jobs to get by. The Duke was defeated all over again by this stubborn, guileless noblewoman. He genuinely began to question reality. Was this bold woman really the frail, silent fiancée from the engagement banquet? He had never expected her to be so reckless. In the end, the Duke granted her request. Karina was overjoyed, and immediately pressed the annulment agreement into his hands, adding that if she ever suddenly disappeared, he should simply assume she had left, and consider it a chance to be rid of a tiresome burden. She asked him not to send anyone looking for her. The Duke paid no attention to that strange little speech. He simply had the butler prepare a room once she had finished. And so Karina settled into the house of the fiancé who supposedly despised her. Their daughter had been gone for 2 months, and her family never noticed. It was a maid, cleaning the room, who finally found the letter Karina had left on the desk. And when the maid brought that letter to Karina's parents, their first reaction was not concern, it was blame. Her mother railed against Karina for leaving without a word. Her father's face darkened with anger. Doesn't she always run off on errands without telling anyone? She has absolutely no consideration for this family. She simply does whatever she pleases. He turned and asked the maid when she had last seen Karina, and the maid replied that she had seen her only once 2 months ago. He then asked his younger son and daughter, and they both said they had not seen their sister in 2 months. Her elder brother offered a thought. It might be because we planned the picnic on Karina's birthday. That must have hurt her. I should have scheduled it for another day. Her mother saw it differently. She knew perfectly well this would upset us. How could she leave with nothing but a note? If she hated the picnic that much, she could simply have told us. By the way, is there money missing from the house? The maid reported that only 2 gold coins were unaccounted for. Her father let out a scornful laugh. See, she won't get far. It won't be long before she comes back. And when she does, I intend to teach her a lesson. He turned to a servant. Send a few men to look into where Karina has gone. She has no money. She can't have traveled far. Her mother remained a little uneasy. It has been 2 months already. I only hope nothing has happened to her. What could possibly happen to her? She always finds ways like this to break our hearts. Let this be an opportunity for her to learn how hard life is out there and to appreciate everything she's been given in this house. What they did not know was that the Karina they called inconsiderate was at that very moment lying in bed, shaking violently, burning with a raging fever. Her fever was sky-high, and yet Karina felt bitterly cold. She wrapped herself in blanket after blanket and still could not stop shivering. At last the cold became unbearable, so she decided to get up while she still could and fetch a hot towel and a kettle from the kitchen. Overlooked since childhood, she had long ago learned to take care of herself. But the manor was enormous, and the dark, gloomy corridor frightened her too much to go on. Just as she stood there at a loss, a black shape appeared beside her. Karina nearly jumped out of her skin and swung the oil lamp in her hand at it. Then a familiar voice reached her ears and she settled at once. The figure was her fiancé, Duke Mullane. Karina let out a long breath of relief. Then, like a child caught misbehaving, she asked timidly, "What are you doing here?" Duke Mullane scratched his head at a loss for an answer. Was he supposed to admit that he had come to check on her because he was worried? That would make him sound hopelessly besotted. So he claimed the temperature regulator in his room was broken, and he had come out to inspect it. But the Duke could not understand why Karina was wandering the halls alone in the middle of the night, breathing rapidly, her cheeks flushed, her voice shaking noticeably. A bad feeling began to take shape. He seized her hand. "Do you have a fever?" Karina's instinct was to hide it. She did not want to be a burden to anyone. But her acting was poor. It might have been enough to fool her family, but in front of someone who genuinely cared, it was almost painful to watch. Feeling the heat radiating from her palm, the Duke's chest tightened with an unfamiliar ache. He could not help himself. "If you're unwell, you should tell me immediately. Why would you endure this alone until now?" Only a foolish bear suffers in silence. Karina blinked. He had just compared her to a bear? But before she could protest, his tone hardened. "Do you know what causes the most deaths on a battlefield? People concealing their illnesses. If you don't want things to get worse, speak up sooner. Now, do you understand what you did wrong?" Karina, conditioned by years of unfair treatment, apologized on reflex. "I'm sorry." Then she caught herself. Why was she being interrogated in the middle of the night for no reason? She lifted her head to speak, only to be cut off by the fingers he held up. "How many fingers am I holding up?" In Karina's vision, 6 blurred images swam before her. She reasoned it through. No one has 6 fingers, and double vision usually shows 2 of everything. So she declared confidently, 3 fingers. The Duke looked down at the 2 fingers he was holding up and began to question his life choices. Seeing him say nothing, Karina assumed she had guessed correctly and congratulated herself on her cleverness. The next second, the Duke swept her up into his arms. "This house isn't fit for a sick person. You'll rest in my wing instead. I know you don't like me, but I'd rather you didn't think of me as a cruel man. Just sleep and don't worry about anything." Karina, cradled in his arms, could no longer fight off sleep. She only mumbled a request that he not call a doctor. The Duke promised over and over, "Don't worry, I'll look after you myself." Melaine watched her lying there burning with fever, and his heart ached. What was she hiding? She was clearly in agony, so why would she stop him from calling a doctor? A long while later, Karina forced her eyes open. Alone again, she thought as she woke. Then a familiar voice came from beside her. "You're awake." It startled her badly. The man spoke again. "Your fever hasn't broken yet. Just stay in bed." Karina had no idea what to do with that. "Why are you still here?" It was a fair question. But of course, our proud Duke would never admit that he had stayed because he was worried about her. "Didn't we agree not to call a doctor? And I could hardly ask a servant to look after you, so I intend to stay with you until morning." Karina could not believe it. It was the first time anyone had been willing to sit with her while she was ill. And yet, after years of being treated as an afterthought, she could not stop herself from asking, "Now that I'm sick, won't you find me a nuisance?" The Duke seemed to sense the worry beneath the question, and he answered without hesitation. "You're ill, so you need someone to look after you, and you're my guest." Why on earth would I find that a nuisance? Karina smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had given since she was old enough to understand the world. Back home, she had always been the one giving selflessly, the one caring for her 6 siblings. No one had ever cared for her when she was the one who was ill. And how good it felt, being cared for. This was the first time in her entire life that anyone had looked after her while she was sick. She had always been the one nursing her younger brother and sister, and no one had ever spared a thought for her. Yet this fiancé she had met only a handful of times was willing to sit up with her until dawn. When he moved to fetch the medicine from her bag, she grabbed his hand in alarm. She could not take medicine yet. Before she left, her doctor had warned her that her body was making its final stand, and that taking medicine now would only make it collapse faster. But the Duke, who had been single for 20 years and had never so much as touched a woman's hand, turned scarlet at the sudden contact and began to stammer. "No, you're burning up far too badly." Karina still stubbornly refused the medicine. The Duke could only sit back down in defeat. He truly had no idea what to do with this willful young woman. Watching his reaction, Karina hid a smile behind her hand. Her body was cold and heavy and her vision was dark. But being cared for like this, being allowed to be difficult, was dangerously addictive. The Duke told her to sleep as long as she needed, promising he would stay right there until she woke. Hearing those earnest words, and feeling the solid warmth of his hand, Karina, who a moment ago had felt wide awake, suddenly found her eyelids growing heavy. How reassuring this felt. Was she really allowed to have this kind of care? Watching her sleep, the Duke quietly changed his mind. He would wait until winter had passed before sending a telegram to her family. She did not look happy, and there seemed to be no one at home she could lean on. He would let her stay a few more months. At long last, Karina's raging fever broke. Ever since her illness, the Duke had become remarkably attentive. Every day he came to her room, laid a hand on her forehead as though in greeting, and carefully checked how she was doing. He teased her for always flinching like a startled rabbit. He invited her, smiling, to have lunch with him, and he shared stories of the dangerous hunts he led against the monsters. He had also noticed that Karina loved to paint, because he had seen that her bag was full of art supplies. That astonished her. The family she had lived with under one roof for more than a decade had no idea what her interests were. And yet this fiancé of only a few days knew her so well. The realization left her briefly dazed, and she walked straight into the Duke as he turned around. The unexpected closeness startled them both. The Duke mentioned that she should visit the rooftop at dawn or at sunset, where the view was unlike anything else. And then he slipped into full mother hen mode and delivered a long list of instructions. The wind up there is very cold, so dress warmly before you go. Always tell the butler before you go up. And you must come back down every hour to warm yourself. If you don't want to end up dried out like a strip of squid, remember every word I said. Karina was not the least bit annoyed by the fussing. If anything, it made her happy. How wonderful it felt to be cared for. Although, why compare her to dried squid? Here was a man so hopelessly blunt that he likened his own fiancée to dried seafood. Then the Duke brought up their engagement ceremony. Karina had drifted along behind the maids that day like a walking corpse, with reluctance practically written across her forehead. The Duke said that if she had not wanted the engagement, she should have made that clear to her parents, since it concerned her happiness for the rest of her life. But the Duke had no idea what her situation had been. The engagement had been decided entirely by the older generation. No one had ever asked Karina's opinion. And on the day itself, her parents had skipped the ceremony because Abelier was unwell. Karina bowed and apologized repeatedly. The Duke only shrugged helplessly. What I meant was, if you don't like something, you can simply tell me from now on. More than that, to lift the spirits of his ailing guest, the Duke took her to dine in a glass-domed conservatory. Because Karina had once mentioned she disliked greasy food, he instructed the maids to place all the lighter dishes in front of her. So this was what it was like with someone who truly cared. There was no need to pretend to be anything. Someone who truly cared would remember every word you said. But it also left Karina feeling guilty. She had assumed her fiancé would be cold toward her. And the reality was exactly the opposite. If she died here, it would surely cause him a great deal of trouble. And yet she had grown so attached to being cherished that she could not bring herself to leave. If a person has never seen the light, they can endure the dark. But the moment sunlight tears through the snow, even the strongest heart can no longer bear the cold. Nervously, she apologized to the Duke for arriving unannounced and causing him so much inconvenience. At the same time, she wondered whether she should tell him about the artist's disease. But even if she told him the truth, it would not make her any better. And what if he threw her out because of it? Weighing it all, Karina chose once again to say nothing. The Duke apologized to her as well. I wasn't angry because I disliked your coming. I was worried you might have been hurt on the way. Please forget what I said that day, and don't take it to heart. Karina smiled from the heart once again. And so the two of them shared a lovely afternoon together. It was the first time Karina had ever eaten her fill. She thought again about what the Duke had said before lunch, that the rooftop offered a view unlike any other. Should she go and see it for herself? Karina, who seemed to have a talent for running fevers, ran another one. A deafening voice rang through the ducal manor. Radiating disapproval, the Duke looked this disobedient woman up and down. You truly do let everything I say go in one ear and out the other. Didn't we agree on this? Why did you go up to the roof with nothing but a thin robe? You are impossible to keep safe. It had all happened a few hours earlier. Karina had woken early and not wanting to trouble anyone, and having forgotten the previous day's fussing entirely, had gone up to the rooftop alone. What she saw there was breathtaking. And of course, a woman who loved to paint was never going to let an opportunity like that pass. She immediately took out her brushes and began to work. As her brush swept across the paper, her temperature climbed steadily, but she did not want to stop. Just a little more, and then her body pitched backward beyond her control. Fortunately, Duke Mullane, who had been worrying about her the entire time, caught her in time. Which brings us back to where we started. The Duke berated her furiously. If you want to freeze to death, just say so. I'll be happy to fill your bathtub with ice. Faced with his lecturing, Karina simply smiled foolishly at him, and the Duke, furious as he was, found himself disarmed by that carefree smile. Before he knew it, his large hand had reached out toward her. "Why can't you turn into a portable heater instead? At least then you'd save me some fuel." Then the Duke noticed the unfinished painting still in her hands. "May I see your work?" "Of course, though my technique probably isn't very good." Compared with her brilliant elder brother, her younger brother Pelton, who could master anything at a glance, and her sister Abelier, who could embroider the most intricate and beautiful patterns with ease, her paintings were hardly worth mentioning. Even her own parents would not spare them a second look. But the Duke looked at her painting and fell completely silent. "I think that being so modest doesn't always serve you well. I don't have much expertise in this area, and I can't give you a professional judgment, but this is the most beautiful painting I have seen in all my years. You paint exceptionally well." That earnest, unqualified praise left Karina scarlet. Nothing she had done as a child had ever been acknowledged. Her parents had eyes only for her brothers and her sister, and it had taught her to doubt herself constantly, to believe she was a useless ornament of a daughter. Now someone had recognized what she could do. And even if he only meant to comfort her, the feeling was intoxicating. The Duke seemed to see straight through her lack of confidence, and he told her seriously that once she finished the painting, he could bring in a world-renowned authority on the subject to evaluate it. Though the moment he mentioned this person, his brow furrowed. Just looking at that man makes you want to punch him. At that point, a doctor entered the room, interrupting their conversation. The Duke gave him a brief account of what had caused this latest fever. The moment the doctor reached out his hand, Karina shrank back and buried herself completely under the blankets. The doctor was left with his hand hanging awkwardly in midair, and he turned a pleading look toward the Duke who had summoned him. The Duke was baffled as well. He could not understand why the unfailingly polite Karina would behave like this. "Didn't I tell you I don't like doctors?" came a muffled grumble from beneath the covers. But the Duke had decided he was done indulging her. He simply picked her up, blankets and all, and carried her to the bed. The doctor was horrified. "My lord, how can you treat a noble lady so roughly?" Karina was too stunned to react at all. The Duke saw nothing wrong with it. "I'm being quite gentle with her, actually." The doctor pressed a hand to his forehead in despair. These two were going to be the end of him. At last, after some careful coaxing, the doctor managed to take Karina's pulse. As the saying goes, you need not fear a smiling physician, but you should fear one whose eyes go grave. The instant his fingers found her pulse, his expression darkened. He eased her back down onto the bed. Her pulse is unsteady. Her heartbeat is weak, and there are already death marks on her skin. It appears the lady does not have long. Hearing the diagnosis, the Duke finally understood how much pain this willful runaway had been living with, but he could not make sense of it. Why would someone whose life was nearly over choose to run away from home? What was she hiding? He thought back to the day of their engagement. Only her elder brother and younger brother had attended, and the look she gave them had been so bleak. Yet whenever someone greeted her, a practiced smile appeared on her face. Did she always accommodate others so blindly? He summoned his messenger hawk, hoping that before the first snow he would receive a reply from that infuriating man, Flair. Meanwhile, at a clinic in the south, the doctor who had once diagnosed Karina could not put his mind at ease. He decided to travel north to find her, because the physicians in the north knew nothing about the artist's disease. He instructed his apprentice, Norton, to look after the clinic, and to treat every patient fairly. That patient with the artist's disease is in such a serious condition precisely because her family physician did not take her seriously. And her parents seem terribly biased as well, so you must treat every patient equally, or I will not let it go. With that, he boarded a carriage and hurried north. At the same hour, inside the Count's estate, there was still no word about Karina. Her elder brother was frantic and begged their father to send out soldiers to search. But the Count refused flatly. The moment he deployed men to search, the family would lose face. He clicked his tongue in irritation. How can she be so inconsiderate? Has she no thought for her family at all? Then the Count noticed the family portraits on his desk. There was Abelier, and there were individual portraits of both of his sons. But there was none of Karina. Had there never been one of her at all? For the first time in memory, he rose from his chair and walked toward Karina's room, following whatever memory he had of it. Her words from that night came back to him. So you do still remember where my room is? It's been years since either of you came. I'd assumed you had forgotten me. At the time, he had thought nothing of it, dismissing it as the complaint of someone who had been woken in the middle of the night. But thinking about it now, it truly had been years since he had visited his daughter's room. So many years that he was no longer certain where it was. In the end, he wandered half the estate before finding her room at the end of a pitch-dark corridor. Karina had once said she was afraid of the dark and did not want to live in that room. He had thought she was making a fuss and had scolded her severely for it. But looking at it now, it seemed perfectly natural for a child to be frightened. He looked at the handful of furnishings in the room and thought that it really was rather sparse, even for an adult. But if she needed something, why had she never said so? He opened the drawer of the dressing table and found one of Karina's old paintings. It depicted a place they had visited 2 years ago. Abelier's health had improved then, so they had postponed Karina's birthday and gone on a family picnic. But had Karina actually been with the family that day? Just then, Karina's mother opened the door. She saw the painting and remarked that it had been a long time since she had seen any of Karina's work. When she was little, she used to bring her paintings to show me all the time. Later she stopped, perhaps out of embarrassment, and I assumed she had lost interest in painting. I had no idea she was this good. I wonder how she's getting on out there. She really has grown more thoughtless with age. How could she make us worry like this? With her gone, there's no one to look after Abelier, and Abelier misses that inconsiderate sister of hers terribly. Hearing that, the flicker of guilt that had risen in the Count went out again. He waved a dismissive hand. She'll come back on her own. She doesn't have enough money to support herself out there. Once it runs out, she'll come to us soon enough. Just how much damage can one physician do by treating his patients unequally? As the family doctor of the Count's household, he could not bring himself to treat everyone the same. Abelier, who was ill so often, looked very much like his own sister who had died in an accident, so he gave her his undivided attention. And because the family placed no value on the dutiful Karina, he overlooked her as well. Her monthly examination was never once carried out. That was precisely why Karina overused the power of miracles, until she contracted the artist's disease and was left with a single year to live. And of all this, he knew nothing. That day, as always, he was examining the frail Abelier and gently consoling her over her sister's disappearance. Abelier kept telling him how good her sister had been to her. Whenever she felt lonely, her sister would stay with her and refuse to go out and meet friends. Whether it was reading her fairy tales or sleeping beside her, her sister never said no. There was even a time when I was jealous that she could go outside, so I stopped her from seeing her friends on purpose, and she still didn't get angry. Is that so? Then she really was a very good sister to you. But there was another sentence he did not say aloud. And yet she chose to abandon you and run away. However badly she had been treated, for the sake of her sick sister, she should at least have written home. To think Abelier defends her so fiercely, what a selfish person she is. Abelier was delighted to hear Norton praise her sister. She brought out one of Karina's paintings, which she had come across in recent days. Look at this. Isn't my sister's painting wonderful? I only found out now how talented she is. Norton's eyes went wide with shock. Was this really painted by hand? How could anything be so vividly alive? Then something occurred to him and he rose to leave at once. He remembered that before his teacher departed, he had let slip the name of that patient with the artist's disease. Something like Rena. He had felt a flicker of suspicion at the time, but had dismissed it. There were so many people named Rena in the capital. How could it possibly be Karina of the Count's house? She had no extraordinary abilities, and she was perfectly healthy. But now it did not seem so simple. He opened his teacher's clinical records and read through them until at last he was certain. The patient with the artist's disease was Karina. And yet he decided not to tell the Count, because if he did, Abelier would be devastated. Perhaps it was better this way, for Karina to die quietly somewhere far away, for the sake of the sister she doted on. Karina, abandoned by her parents, was finally nearing the end. She had less than a year left, and the death marks had already appeared on her skin. Since the physicians in the north knew nothing about the artist's disease, Duke Mullane sent his hawk with a message to his closest friend. The man was an authority on the arts, and he might be able to help with Karina's treatment. After a night of high fever, Karina finally improved the next morning. She woke desperately thirsty, and was about to get up and fetch water from the kitchen, when she noticed a pot of steaming hot water sitting on the bedside table. Duke Mullane had clearly left it there so that she could have something warm the moment she woke. Karina wept. She hugged the blankets and sobbed without a sound. She should never have come here. He surely knew about her condition by now. Why was he being so kind to her? She had assumed he would ignore her arrival and let her die alone in peace. Why was he so gentle? Like a beam of light shining into a life that had only ever been dark? She was going to die very soon, and he would go on living. If he ever felt guilty about her death, then she was the one who truly deserved to be blamed. What was she supposed to do now? Her medicine was almost gone, and she no longer had the strength to leave the north. Perhaps she should go and live in a monastery. Just as Karina was murmuring to herself, the man appeared. He came straight to the point and asked her exactly which type of artist's disease she had. But Karina no longer wanted the Duke drawn any further into her life. It was not fair to him. So she did not answer his question directly. Instead, she apologized to him again and again. She apologized for hiding her illness, for her selfishness, for barging in and disrupting his peaceful life. She begged him to forget everything that had happened during this time and to pretend she had never appeared at all. Her parents and her family physician wanted her to die somewhere out of sight. But this fiancé, whom she had met only once before, wanted her to live. He did not recoil from her because she was dying. Instead, he tried everything he could to help treat her, and he urged her repeatedly to give up art, because that would give her far more time for treatment and a much better chance of surviving. But Karina refused without a moment's hesitation. If she gave up painting, she would truly have nothing left. Through all those years of unequal treatment, only the creatures she created had ever comforted her. Only they had ever truly understood how she felt. To ask Karina to stop painting was to make her life meaningless. To her, painting was not a skill. It was the friend that would never betray her. Hearing this, the Duke stopped pressing her. Everyone has something or someone they cannot give up, just as he could never give up the sword. And what about all of you watching? Is there something in your life you could never let go of? Once the Duke understood what painting meant to Karina, he let the subject drop and asked her something else instead. Why had she run away from home? Shouldn't the last stretch of a person's life be spent treasuring time with family? In an instant, Karina was back among those painful memories. Have you ever been treated unfairly by your parents? My birthday clashed with my brother's graduation ceremony, so I had to spend it alone. Because my little brother wanted it. I had to give him the only birthday present I ever received. My sister could earn our parents' praise over the smallest thing, while nothing I ever did was enough to get their attention. So when I learned my life was almost over, I didn't want to spend my final days repeating that same pain. That's why I ran away. Do you think that's childish of me? Like a child who never grew up? Childish? Did you ruin your brother's graduation ceremony because you wanted your birthday? Did you throw a tantrum and stab your brother with a needle to get your wallet back? Did you bully your sister because you were jealous of the praise she received? You did none of those things. How could that be childish? Real childishness would be spilling water on your father's documents, and then running away from home for a week because you were afraid of being scolded. That is childish. But you spent your whole life giving way to them. How could anyone call that childish? But giving way to your family is only natural. Why is it natural? You gave way to them, so who gave way to you? Yes. When exactly had she started believing that giving way to them was only natural? The Duke saw the pain in her and drew her head against his chest, which was broader than she was. Stop holding it in. Cry it out. This is the first time I've ever comforted anyone. This is how they do it in novels, isn't it? Go on and cry. You'll feel better. When you're with me, you don't have to carry it all alone. I'll carry it with you. The father who had played favorites all his life finally learned that his daughter had the artist's disease. But his first reaction was not concern. It was flat disbelief because as far as he was concerned, ordinary Karina could never have possessed such a talent. Only moments earlier, Duke Carlos had arrived at the Count's estate at Duke Melane's request. He had come to investigate Karina's illness, and in passing to inform the Count of her whereabouts. The moment he arrived, Duke Carlos asked to see Karina's earlier paintings. The Count found the request odd, but given the gap in their ranks, he ordered his servants to fetch the paintings he had been preparing to throw out as rubbish. These are just idle scribbles from my second daughter. They're crude work. I doubt they're worthy of the Carlos family and its refined taste. Duke Carlos was speechless. How could a father belittle his own daughter like that? Besides, before coming here, he had already seen the painting Duke Melane had sent him. and it was nothing like the worthless scrawl the Count described. He struck back on Karina's behalf without a shred of courtesy. It seems you could stand to improve your eye for art. Even a complete amateur couldn't look at these and say something so plainly untrue. The Count trembled with rage. Lord Carlos, you arrive without warning and ask to see Karina's paintings. I don't know your reasons, but frankly, your behavior just now was extremely rude. Duke Carlos was not the least bit intimidated by the Count's barbed tone. As far as he was concerned, throwing away a priceless work of art as though it were rubbish was the true rudeness. He had also gathered something else from that exchange. Karina's relationship with her family was poor. Of the several artists' disease patients he had supported over the years, few had good relationships with their families. But Karina was without question the most estranged of them all. So estranged that her own family had no idea she possessed such an extraordinary gift. What Duke Carlos could not have known was that Karina had shown her parents her work. It was simply that their eyes were always on her brothers and her sister, so they naturally overlooked the healthy, ordinary second daughter. It seems, my lord, that you have no idea your daughter has the artist's disease. The Count's face filled with disbelief. That's impossible. Karina has no such talent, and her health has always been perfectly fine. If she were truly ill, why would she run away from home? Duke Carlos laughed. So going to stay with one's fiancé now counts as running away? The Count was stunned. Karina was in the north? How had she managed that? Duke Carlos was thoroughly exasperated. You don't even know where your own daughter is, and yet you're certain she's healthy. It seems there's no reason for me to stay here any longer. I have a patient with the artist's disease to see, and I intend to help her. However displeased he was, the Count still rose to see him out, given the difference in their rank. Thank you for bringing me news of my daughter. I shall call on you to express my gratitude in due course. Duke Carlos was ready to explode at this father who so blatantly favored his other children. Your hearing is remarkable, my lord. You only take in what you want to hear. You refuse to believe your daughter has the artist's disease, yet you're perfectly willing to believe she's gone north. If someone told me my child was ill, the first thing I would ask about is her health. There's no need to call on me. I could hardly bear the Count's gratitude. With that, Duke Carlos slammed the door behind him. Looking at the scroll in his hand, part of its content already faded away, he was completely certain. This was the power to create miracles, the power to grant brief life to painted creatures. The young lady's condition must be very grave indeed. Duke Carlos's parting words echoed in the Count's mind for days afterward, and he could not shake them off. With Karina gone, a great many affairs at the estate went unmanaged. His wife collapsed from exhaustion, and the Count's own health began to fail, forcing him to start taking medication. And all of those tedious responsibilities had been handled by Karina alone. Then his eldest son, Arrow, entered the room with the family physician, Norton. Norton reported on Abelier's condition and the Countess's recovery, but from beginning to end, he never once mentioned Karina and her artist's disease. Even as he left, he held firmly to his own conclusion. Perhaps letting Karina die quietly somewhere far away was the best possible outcome for Abelier and for the entire household. Once Norton had gone, the Count brought up Duke Milaine as casually as he could manage. Arrow, you attended Karina's engagement banquet in my place. What sort of man did Duke Milaine seem to you? Arrow answered without hesitation. Exactly as the rumors say, he's a man beyond reproach. He was also very considerate toward Karina at the time, and Karina seemed quite pleased with him as well. The Count was thoroughly displeased to hear that. So she ran away simply because someone showed her a little kindness, with no thought at all for how the household would cope. Now her mother has collapsed from exhaustion because of her selfishness. And after all this time, not a single letter. She leaves her parents worrying day after day. It's nothing short of unfilial. And yet I remember Karina was never like this. When exactly did she change? Even now, the Count still refused to believe that his daughter had the artist's disease and was dying. The mother had collapsed from exhaustion, and the father who played favorites was living on medication. And while the Count's household descended into chaos, our poor Karina, at the very end of her life, was finally living a life in which she was loved, valued, and cared for. Karina had recently found a new pleasure. Every day she rose in the small hours, took out her painting supplies, and captured the Duke practicing his sword work in the moonlight. At the same time, she had begun filling in the list of things she wanted to do before she died. She wanted to spend whatever time remained doing things that were interesting and worthwhile. But having spent her whole life revolving around her family, she had no idea what to write. So she decided to ask the Duke what was worth seeing in the north. Just as she was thinking it over, the Duke's voice appeared out of nowhere and startled her. Apart from the ferocious monsters, there isn't much in the north worth seeing. And what exactly are you doing over here so secretively? I knocked 5 times and you didn't hear a single one. With that, he snatched up her unfinished painting and asked with a mischievous grin, "And what is this? No wonder you sleep in so late every morning. You've been up before dawn secretly painting me. I am the commander of the entire north, you know. If you want to paint me, my rates are rather high." Karina turned crimson and blurted out without thinking, "That's only because you looked so magnificent, dancing with your sword alone under the pale moonlight." That single, unguarded declaration, 20 years in the making, completely shattered the composure of a duke who had been single his entire life. He hurried to change the subject. "I happen to be inspecting the territory today. Would you like to come along?" A short while later, Karina appeared before them all, dressed and ready, and the Duke's face turned scarlet all over again. He could not wait to take her small hand and help her into the carriage. Inside the carriage, the Duke stared at her without blinking. Now this was how a noble lady ought to look. "What is that you're holding? I noticed it earlier." Blushing, Karina explained what the notebook was for. The Duke offered her some thoughts of his own. "It doesn't have to be anything grand, and you shouldn't overthink it. Write down things that are within your reach. If I may speak frankly, I think you overthink everything. You care far too much about what others think, and in doing so, you lose sight of yourself. So, Karina, the world is a very large place. Don't shut yourself away inside that little estate. You should learn to love yourself more. You were always meant to be a great tree, and your family planted you in a tiny flower pot, so you had no choice but to put down your roots in that small space. But this tree no longer has to endure it. It can break free of the pot. None of this is your fault. I hope that in the days to come, I can be at your side, and that you will also learn to be kinder to yourself." A countess's daughter with a fortune to her name was left utterly astonished by an ordinary street market. There were monsters being butchered along the road, and ornaments made from monster hide and bone. She had never seen or heard of any of it before. Seeing her reaction, our Duke naturally awakened his inner devoted husband. "Take anything you like. I could buy this entire street for you." But the instant Duke Mullane said those words, an urgent alarm rang out across the city. It was the alarm that sounded only when monsters attacked. For the safety of the residents, the two of them hurried to the city wall. The Duke quickly gathered information from the guards about the approaching monster, then instructed Karina to wait where she was. And with that under her astonished gaze, he leapt from the towering wall and threw himself into battle with the attacking monster, a Herta. Before long, the Duke had left dozens of wounds across the creature's body. But the Herta was enormous, and its back was covered in tough scales, which made it nearly impossible to kill. The most Duke Mullane could do was drive it away. Karina watched the desperate fight with mounting worry. She wanted to help the man who had been taking care of her, but going down there would only get in his way. Then an idea came to her. She dug her painting supplies out of her travel bag. If this worked, it might be exactly what he needed. Not long after, worn down by the Duke's relentless attacks, the Herta lost patience. With one final roar of frustration, it turned and left. Karina rushed toward the Duke. He was in the middle of tallying the casualties when he noticed her arriving, out of breath in front of him. She took out a handkerchief and gently wiped away the blood running down his forehead. Seeing the worry in her eyes, the Duke quickly reassured her. "This is all monster blood. Don't worry, I'm not hurt." Then he produced a necklace and fastened it around her neck. His men behind him nearly dropped their jaws, insisting it could not possibly be happening. The Duke was not amused. Everyone who just shouted, "Go run 300 laps around the city." The unscrupulous physician who wished his patient would die far from home happened to have a teacher who devoted his life to healing others. Unable to stop worrying about his patient, the old doctor traveled 1,000 miles north and found Karina out on an excursion with the Duke. Both the Duke and Karina were amazed. The north was vast. How had the doctor found them so precisely? Seeing their confusion, the doctor took out a piece of embroidery. "I found you through the power of miracles. For instance, if I think to myself that I want to find my glasses, and then burn the embroidery, I'll know exactly where they are. When I was young, I even used this ability to catch criminals." The Duke immediately seized on what mattered. Then you have the artist's disease as well? And has yours been cured? The doctor shook his head sadly. My artist's disease was never cured. I overused the power, and my eyesight is nearly gone. The only reason I can still make out anything at all is that I gave up embroidery. It's the simplest and quickest solution there is. The Duke was not ready to accept that. Is that truly the only way? Yes, it is the only way. In truth, not everyone develops the artist's disease. Even among artists who can create miracles, only about 1 in 100 contracts it. But a condition like mine, losing one's sight, is not uncommon among those who do. The rarest form of all is the one where a person creates life at the cost of their own. The Duke let out a breath of relief. So as long as it isn't the type that creates life, it won't threaten her life. That's correct, which is exactly why I came. I want to confirm which type of artist's disease Lady Karina has. Karina cut the doctor off in alarm. Let's continue this conversation in my room. Because of her family's neglect and their refusal to understand her, Karina had learned from a young age to hold conversations with herself. And through that, she had learned patience and endurance. She was never the protagonist of her own life. She was forever the supporting character in someone else's. As a younger sister, she had to quietly support the brother who would inherit everything. As an older sister, she had to be ready at any moment to sacrifice for the younger two. There was no room in her life for a single selfish wish. She had tried to fight it once. When she was upset and asked to sleep beside her mother refused because she had to soothe her little brother. That time, Karina pushed back. She shouted, "Why is it always him? I wish he'd never been born." What she got in return was a hard slap from her mother and a torrent of disappointment. How can you be so inconsiderate? Throwing a tantrum like this, is that any way for an older sister to behave? You shouldn't be jealous of your brother. You should be grateful he was born healthy and treat him even better. If only your sister were half as healthy as you are. From that day on, whenever she felt unwell, they assumed she was pretending. And they told her that if she kept making trouble, they would throw her out into the slums. All she had ever wanted was for her family to care about her, to love her. The doctor had never imagined that this fragile young woman had carried so much pain. He took her hand with genuine sympathy and gently comforted her as she wept. Staying beside people who hurt you like that must have been unbearable. Let me tell you my own story. It's nothing compared to the injustice you've endured, my lady, but I hope you might find in it some reason to keep living. When I was young, I loved embroidery, but no one around me understood. They all said no grown man should be doing embroidery. My parents wanted me to become a knight and earn a title, but I wanted no part of that, so I threw myself into embroidery even harder. Then one day I lost something very precious to me. I embroidered an image of it and burned the piece, the way we burn offerings for the dead. And then a miracle happened. The burnt embroidery led me straight to the thing I had lost. After that, I used the ability like some kind of hero, helping the authorities catch criminals and helping people find lost pets and missing children. Going from someone everyone ignored and mocked to someone everyone praised and envied, I enjoyed it immensely. Until one day my vision began to fail and I could no longer produce embroidery I was satisfied with. The doctor said I had the artist's disease and that if I continued, I would go permanently blind. I was in complete despair back then. I wanted to die. In the end, I set out on a journey, just as you have. But on that journey, I found a new dream, so I gave up embroidery and became a physician. I don't want the artist's disease to be called incurable, which is why I can't give up on you easily either. So, Karina, don't give up on yourself either. There are still a great many things in this world worth doing. Now tell me something. Why did you only see a doctor once your condition was already this severe? Did your family physician, Norton, never notice? As a family physician, he could not bring himself to treat every member of that household equally. And when he learned that Karina had the artist's disease and was dying, he chose to keep it to himself, even hoping she would die quietly somewhere far away. What he did not know was that Karina had once harbored feelings for him. Karina had been 18 at the time. In the garden, she had met the new family physician, Norton, on his first visit to the house. Norton greeted her first. It was their first meeting, and his smile was shy, and the things he said made this girl who had never mattered to anyone feel unexpectedly welcome. Karina began to follow his movements without meaning to, and every time Norton answered with a broad smile. For the first time in her life, this girl who had grown up neglected felt someone's warmth. Then one day she ran into him again. She hurried over, eager to talk to him. And though her heart was full of 1,000 things to say, all that came out was, "Norton, what are you doing here?" Norton said shyly that he wanted to pick a flower for someone and that she would surely love it. Karina's heart began to pound. She was already preparing to accept him. And then her sister Abelier appeared, and her hopes collapsed in an instant. The love she thought she had was nothing but her own fantasy from beginning to end. She was disappointed, but Karina had adapted to loneliness since childhood, and she recovered quickly. One day, as usual, Karina took her sister, who was not permitted to go outdoors, to the library to choose books. Her sister complained endlessly about Norton, and how he would not let her do this or that. But listening to those complaints filled Karina with a quiet ache. The nagging her sister resented so much was the very thing Karina longed for and could never have. While she was lost in thought, her sister popped out from behind a bookshelf. The wooden shelf lost its balance and toppled toward Karina. Norton, outside the door, came rushing in, shouting Abelier's name in a panic. He saw Karina injured and pinned beneath the shelf, and Abelier standing to one side, crying over what she had done. And the first thing he did was comfort the frightened Abelier. He was a doctor, and he paid no attention whatsoever to the woman trapped under the bookshelf. Instead, he turned on Karina and shouted, "What on earth were you doing? Abelier is not like you. She is fragile. It's fortunate the shelf fell toward your side today. What if it had fallen on Abelier? Is this how you look after your sister? Or perhaps you wanted her dead?" And with that, he carried the sobbing Abelier out of the library, leaving Karina behind with her leg crushed and broken beneath the shelf. Even then, Karina foolishly told herself that he had only acted that way because he cared so much about Abelier and had panicked. But she waited until nightfall, and Norton never came back. From that day on, Karina saw things clearly. Norton was exactly like her parents. Everything he had revolved around Abelier. So, even if I asked him to examine me, he would never tell me the truth about my condition, because he'd be afraid the news would upset Abelier and interfere with her treatment. The doctor was furious when he heard this. He had told Norton time and again to treat every patient equally, and the man had not taken in a single word. But the doctor was not the only one who was furious. Outside the door, the Duke was listening in, and his eyes were rolling with rage. This woman treated her own life as though it were worth nothing. She knew perfectly well that painting was consuming what little time she had left. And yet, in order to help the Duke find the Herda's weak point, she paid with her life to paint the creature. All that remained was to add the color, and the monster on the page would come alive. But halfway through, she discovered to her dismay that she had run out of paint. And a pang of guilt rose in her as well. The creatures she created through painting were connected to her heart, and when she was helpless and hurting, it was always they who kept her company. Now it felt as though she were using her own children. And yet she truly did want to help the Duke who had taken care of her. As she wavered, her eye caught the necklace glittering nearby. The Duke had given it to her a few days earlier on their outing. He had told her about a northern legend. The stone was called a Haroon, an extraordinarily rare object found inside slain monsters, and it was said that if someone very frail wore one, they would grow healthy. Cradling the Haroon, Karina felt her breathing ease considerably. She closed her eyes and made up her mind. She was going to die anyway, so before she did, she would repay the man who had cared for her. Meanwhile, the Duke, practicing his sword work under the moon, was puzzled not to feel Karina's gaze on him. When he learned she was short of art supplies, he immediately arranged the most comfortable carriage, and slyly wore an outfit matching hers, which left Karina rather flustered. She had been in the north for some time now, but the Duke's attentiveness still took some getting used to. Still, the thought of a brand new set of art supplies, and of being treated as though she mattered, made it impossible not to feel happy. On the way, the Duke reminded her over and over that if she felt the slightest discomfort, she must say so, and never hide it for fear of troubling anyone. He also told her that he had sent one of her paintings to the Carlos family. The Carlos family are the empire's recognized authorities on art appraisal, and they also know a great deal about the artist's disease. Their head, Carlos, is a very good friend of mine, and he should be on his way north right now. It might help with treating your illness. That news frightened Karina. Having been ignored and dismissed all her life, even the Duke's earlier praise had not been enough to undo the self-doubt she had carried since childhood. The Duke saw the anxiety in her and gently reassured her. Karina, you are remarkable and your paintings are wonderful. Since you chose to escape that suffocating household, you should live for yourself now. Don't let them influence you any longer. And you're not alone anymore. Just as the Duke was working up to a heartfelt confession, the owner of the clothing shop, who had come to greet them, accidentally cut him off. The Duke was thoroughly annoyed, but with Karina present, he could hardly lose his temper. He explained through gritted teeth, "This is the finest tailor in the north. Before we go for your art supplies, we'll order you some clothing suited to the northern climate, along with a few work smocks for painting." Karina hurried to refuse, but the Duke had no intention of letting her. He simply waved a hand. "Bring out every expensive garment in the shop." That terrified Karina. She tugged at his arm to stop him. "A few pieces are more than enough, please don't spend so much." But the Duke looked down at her small hand gripping his sleeve and drew his own conclusions. Mother always said that when a woman says no, she means yes. Karina is just being shy. So he gave her a look that said, "Don't worry, I understand. Choose anything you like. And if you behave, I'll get you a necklace too." Karina was speechless. Do you actually understand anything at all? With 3 sentences, she had somehow made a man buy her an entire clothing shop. Resigned to her fate, Karina played along, and spent the next stretch of time as a living dress-up doll. It was a long while before Karina finally had a chance to collapse onto a sofa. The shop's owner, meanwhile, was grinning from ear to ear as she kept up the sales pitch. "We also have some garments in a foreign style over here. Would you care to take a look?" Karina refused at once. She had no desire to go through that again. But the Duke assumed she was feeling unwell and laid a hand on her forehead. Exhausted as she was, the sudden coolness felt wonderful, and she leaned into it without thinking. Then her eyes flew open and she stammered an explanation. "I didn't mean to. Your hand is just so cool, so I—" But that was not what concerned the Duke. He asked her anxiously, "Do you have a fever? Why are you so hot? Perhaps we should go back." Karina was thrown by the question. You put your hand on a young woman's forehead out of nowhere. Who wouldn't get flushed? But she was far too embarrassed to say it, especially since she had just been nuzzling his hand. So she claimed there were simply too many clothes and she could not decide. And once again the Duke understood. Karina left the shop in a huff, and the Duke coaxed her carefully the whole way. "I was perfectly happy to buy all of it for you. Why are you still sulking?" Karina simply felt she did not need that many clothes, and there had been no reason to buy them all. Besides, it was the first time anyone had ever said the words, "buy all of it," to her. The Duke insisted it was nothing. "Think of it as my apology for sending your painting to Duke Carlos without your permission." Karina could only sigh. "But there's no possible way I'll ever wear all of them." The Duke replied, "We have plenty of time. You can work through them slowly. Now next we should go and buy the supplies you need." What is it like to have a territorial lord for a fiancé? Too many clothes to choose from? Simple, take them all home. What's that, too many clothes to ever wear? Then change outfits every day, morning and evening, and whenever you have a spare moment. Karina turned bright red at this outrageous behavior. She had never imagined that the attention and care she never received from her own family would come from a fiancé she had known only a few months. Thinking of everything Melaine had done for her, Karina could not stop her heart from stirring. She carefully took his large hand and interrupted the Duke, who was clearly plotting more dress-up sessions at home. "Come on, we should go and buy my painting supplies." The moment they entered the art supply shop, Karina's eyes lit up and she stared at the merchandise without blinking. The Duke, meanwhile, was still savoring the lingering warmth on his hand. The shop owner took one look at the finely dressed pair and dismissed them as nobles, slumming it for amusement. So when Karina said she wanted to buy some supplies, he impatiently tried to hurry them along, saying he had nothing here fine enough for nobility. That infuriated the doting Melaine, who was on the verge of losing his temper, while Karina scrambled to hold him back. Then the owner noticed Karina's hands. He suddenly leaned in and asked if he could take a look at them. The Duke was even less pleased now. It was bad enough that the man had tried to throw them out. Now he was making advances on his fiancée. Did he really think the Duke would not act? But Karina simply held out her hands without hesitation. When the owner saw the calluses on her hands, he immediately apologized. "So you truly do love painting. I assumed you were some wealthy young lady who paints as a hobby. Let me make it up to you. Look at whatever you like here. I'll give you my very best price and I'll have it all delivered to your door." Karina could no longer contain her excitement and hurried over to look, leaving one very put-out Duke standing there alone. Once he had collected himself, the Duke rather grudgingly began discussing a large order with the shop owner, because he wanted to build Karina a studio of her own. He also asked, out of curiosity, whether the owner was a painter himself. How else could he have known Karina loved painting from the calluses on her hands alone? The owner admitted it readily. Yes, I love painting a great deal as well. But later, I contracted the artist's disease, and both of my hands began to stiffen. Since I moved to the north, however, my condition has slowly improved. So I settled here and opened this shop. The Duke was about to ask more about his recovery, when Karina suddenly coughed up blood beside them and everything else went out of his head. Karina had been out shopping when she suddenly coughed up blood and lost consciousness. Drifting in and out of awareness, she felt as though she were floating in midair. Her whole body burned, her heart felt as if it were on fire, and she could not draw breath. Just as she felt she was about to suffocate, a cool touch settled on her forehead and pulled her back from that feverish world. The moment she opened her eyes, she saw the Duke's anxious face. How do you feel? Any clearer? Dr. Winston says you've simply been overtaxing yourself lately. What exactly have you been doing? Karina looked away guiltily. She did not want the Duke to know she had been using the power of miracles, so she tried to pass it off as poor sleep. But after all these weeks together, the Duke knew her little habits far too well. Karina, there's no need to lie to me. Every time you lie, you roll your eyes and smile. So you'll rest properly for the next few days, and I'll look after you myself. Caught out, Karina covered her eyes in embarrassment. Melaine, you don't have to be this good to me. If you're too kind to me, it will only make it harder when we part. So let's just be a little kind to each other. That's enough. 3 days passed like this, and at last Karina was allowed out of bed. For those 3 days, Melaine had stayed by her side constantly, and apart from trips to the washroom, he insisted on doing absolutely everything for her himself. If anything, it made Karina want even more to do something in return. So the moment she was on her feet, she went straight to the painting she had left unfinished. Yes, it would make her condition worse. But what was that compared to helping the man she loved? Karina finished the painting quickly. Then her beautiful eyes began to change. A moment later, a single foot larger than she was emerged from the canvas. Karina broke into a cold sweat. Wait, this isn't right. She had never expected that a creature she had drawn so casually would be this enormous. The next second, everyone in the ducal manor felt a violent tremor. Worried for Karina, the Duke was the first to reach her room. But when he saw the Herta standing before her, he immediately, carefully, called for her to move aside while preparing himself for battle. Karina, however, threw herself into his arms to stop him. This child is my creation. It hasn't hurt me at all. It was then that the Duke noticed her eyes had turned golden. Karina, have you been using the power of miracles? Karina hurriedly covered her eyes. I'm sorry, you must hate this color. No, I think it suits you. But you know that the artist's disease worsens every time you use a miracle. Have you forgotten? For your own sake, deal with it quickly. But Karina held onto the Herta and refused to move. No. It's a child I created. It will vanish on its own before long. You mustn't hurt it. The Duke sighed in defeat. Then let's at least move it outside. He tried speaking to the creature. Herta, can you get out through here? To his astonishment, the Herta nodded like a person. But its enormous body had no room to maneuver in the cramped bedroom, and it left devastation in its wake. Karina broke into a sweat and apologized profusely, promising she would find work and pay for every bit of the damage. The Duke could not have cared less. He stroked her forehead gently. Compared to your health, none of this is worth mentioning. Let's get outside and settle the creature first. Out in the courtyard, the Herta showed none of the frenzy they had expected. The Duke could not help asking, Aren't you afraid of it? Look at these knights behind me. They've all seen countless battles and they're still tense. Yet you seem completely calm. Karina's smile was very gentle. Because it's a child I created. Our hearts are connected. It also happens to be the one creature in this world who understands me best. But the Duke had another question. There are so many kinds of monsters. Why did you choose a Herta? A faint blush crossed Karina's face. Because I wanted to help you find the Herta's weak point. The Duke found this deeply troubling. I never once wanted you to help me. Your body is in this condition. You don't need to keep sacrificing yourself for other people. No, I'm not helping other people. I'm helping you. I don't want you getting hurt fighting the monsters. Then Karina gripped her skirt nervously. Melaine, would you promise me one thing? If what I've done helps you at all, then when we part, would you hold me tightly just once? If I can carry the warmth of you with me at the end of my life, then I'll be able to leave this world smiling, with no regrets. Duke Melaine said nothing at all, because he had already fallen deeply in love with the poor woman in front of him, and all this time he had refused to face the fact that she was dying. After a long silence, he finally agreed, but on one condition of his own. He asked her never again to take such matters into her own hands, because he did not need that kind of help from her. And that single sentence sent a sharp pain through Karina's chest. She lowered her head and agreed. If you hate it, then I won't do it again. The Duke knew at once that she had misunderstood. He was scrambling to explain, when the butler appeared and interrupted him. Your Grace, Lord Carlos has arrived. Reunions between the closest of friends are always so understated. Duke Carlos, having traveled a long way, politely extended his hand to Karina, only for Duke Melaine to intercept it halfway. You think you're going to take advantage of the moment and touch my lady's delicate hand? Absolutely not. Carlos, whose hand was now caught in a crushing grip, began squeezing back. And you think I'm going to let you get away with that? Not a chance. And so a silent contest of wills between two grown men quietly began. In the end, it was Karina who broke the standoff. Why don't we sit down and talk? Both men wiped their hands off with matching expressions of disgust, and then immediately got down to business. When Duke Carlos heard that the monster Karina had created still had not disappeared, he was astounded. Her ability seemed to be somewhat beyond his expectations. And Duke Melaine, who had been worrying about Karina all along, finally asked the question that had been bothering him for so long. What exactly was the miracle Karina could create? Carlos patiently explained it to his friend. The miracle Karina possesses is the rarest and most powerful of them all. Take any living creature. Whether or not it exists in this world, as long as Karina can conceive of it, she can create it exactly as she imagines. She can even create entirely new life. Both Karina and Melaine were stunned. Her ability was truly that powerful. But neither of them noticed the words Duke Carlos was holding back. There was more he had not told them. Because heaven is fair. When you want to obtain something or possess a certain power, you must pay an equal price. Which is why those with this particular power rarely live past 30. For now, though, he chose not to say it. Instead, he changed the subject entirely. Karina, I have something to give you. It's a letter your father, Count Leopold, wrote for you. The father who had ignored her all her life had finally shown some concern for the daughter he had overlooked. This time he had written a letter by hand and asked Duke Carlos to deliver it. But hearing that plunged Karina into ice. Every unhappy memory came flooding back at once. As she sank further into them, Duke Melaine's warm hand settled on her sweat-soaked forehead and pulled her out of that suffocating despair. Karina, it's all right. You still have me. If you'd like, I'll throw that inconsiderate fellow out this instant. Duke Carlos, caught in the crossfire, was speechless. Truly, what are best friends for if not to be thrown under the carriage? But joking aside, Carlos did apologize for causing her distress. I'm sorry, Karina. It seems I shouldn't have accepted this letter. Karina did not blame Duke Carlos, who could not have known. On the contrary, now that she had recovered herself, she wanted to know what her father had written. Once she had steadied her emotions, Karina slowly opened the envelope. As expected, the very first line was another accusation. Karina, what audacity! If you were unhappy about something, why not say so directly? Why choose to run away and throw this household into chaos? Abelier's condition is deteriorating because she's worried about you. As the older sister, why can't you show any concern for your younger siblings? And have you considered the enormous damage your behavior will do to the family's reputation? If you don't want to be cast out, come home at once and stop dragging our name through the mud. Karina finished reading and laughed at herself. What had she been hoping for? Compared with her safety, her father clearly valued the family name far more. You always tell me to speak up if I'm unhappy. But when I did speak, which one of you ever truly listened? All you see is Abelier and her poor health. And can her condition right now possibly be worse than that of a dying woman? Utterly disillusioned, Karina rose and walked straight to the fireplace. Even at the very end, you refuse to believe I'm ill. Of course, if I were ill, I'd only be an inconvenience to them. So let whatever bond exists between father and daughter be severed here. Now that I've read these words. Goodbye, father. Having burned the letter, Karina turned to reassure the two stunned dukes. But the moment she opened her mouth, a sharp pain seized her heart. Something had happened to the Herta. Enduring the agony, Karina rushed toward the creature. Outside, everything had fallen into chaos. The Herta, which had been so quiet and gentle, was now violently agitated. Karina tried desperately to intervene, but Duke Mullane caught her and pulled her into his arms. "Karina, that monster is dangerous right now. Stay back, Karina." Then he turned and demanded to know from the knights present exactly what had happened. It turned out that a short while earlier, two knights had been watching the Herta, a creature normally bloodthirsty and violent, sitting there so peacefully, and their curiosity had gotten the better of them. One of them had even drawn his sword, hoping to use the opportunity to locate the Herta's weak point. What he had not anticipated was that this would enrage the creature, and things had escalated from there into the current situation. Duke Mullane's face turned to stone. He had issued a strict warning, and his own men had disobeyed his orders and nearly gotten Karina killed. He apologized to her, filled with guilt, but Karina was not angry with him at all. She reassured him instead, saying she knew how to handle it. Mullane's feelings were in complete disarray. He was about to speak when Duke Carlos, who had been watching the two of them with amusement, interrupted. "Excuse me, both of you. It seems you've forgotten there's an expert standing right here." Once he had their attention, Duke Carlos dropped his flippant manner and spoke to Mullane seriously. "That creature was made by Karina, so only Karina can calm it down. Don't worry, it won't harm her." Since his friend was so certain, the Duke stopped resisting. He quickly ordered everyone to move well away from the Herta, giving Karina a quiet space to work. Even after issuing those orders, he was still uneasy. He bent his head and murmured a few words in Karina's ear, then reminded his men once more to stay silent before turning away. Karina then approached, nervous and uncertain, the great child she had made with her own hands. She slowly reached out and spoke softly. "It's all right now, child. Don't be afraid." And the frenzied Herta truly did settle as she drew nearer. In that moment, Karina's mind went back to what Duke Mullane had whispered in her ear. "Karina, when you're with me, you don't have to hold yourself back. Do whatever you want to do. Because no matter what happens, I'll be right beside you to protect you." Karina, who loved to paint, finally had a studio all her own. Duke Mullane had prepared it for her with great care. Back at home, Karina had not owned so much as a decent set of brushes, and her room had been unbearably dim by day and by night. And yet, in the house of a fiancé she had known for barely 3 months, she now had a bright, luxurious studio entirely her own. Karina loved this unusual gift dearly. It was more precious than any present she had received in her entire life. But alongside the joy came an ache. And it was not for herself, it was for the Duke. She knew her life was almost over. She could not be there beside him in the days to come, and so she could not face his feelings either. All she could do was carefully keep her distance from such a precious gift. The Duke sensed her discomfort, so he reframed the studio as a thank you gift for her help in identifying the Herta's weak point. But Karina still felt she did not deserve it, since the Herta she had created had knocked over so many people and destroyed so much furniture. Faced with someone so relentlessly earnest, the Duke was at a loss and simply turned his head away in embarrassment and said nothing. Karina let out a small laugh and stopped teasing him. She turned back and thanked him sincerely. "I love this gift. Now I'll never have to worry about running out of paint, and I have a bright, spacious studio where I can work whenever I like. It's only a shame that I can stay here for just 6 more months. No, if you're willing, you can stay here forever. And even after you return to your family's estate, you're welcome to come here and paint whenever you like." But the kinder he was, the more it hurt. She fidgeted miserably with her fingers. She wanted to tell him the truth, but she did not want to fill his future with grief. In the end, she forced a smile, turned away, and thanked him for his kindness. Perhaps quietly disappearing was the best thing she could do for him, and for everyone. After leaving her room, the Duke could not help feeling a pang of regret at how quickly the time was passing, and a certain frustration too. Why had he only agreed to 1 year with her? Why had he not been greedier back then? To win one smile from the woman he loved, the Duke was prepared to abandon all his pride. In order to help Karina recover sooner, when his friend Duke Carlos teased him, he did not fire back as he normally would. Instead, he asked him seriously, "You have to cure Karina, because no one understands the artist's disease better than you do." Duke Carlos was genuinely thrown by his friend's sudden sincerity, But looking at the desolation in Melane's retreating figure, he began to understand something. Meanwhile, the Karina he was so worried about was busy banging her head against a wall. Because when she had heard him ask her to stay, she had been so happy. So why had she said something so hurtful? Just as she was debating whether to go and explain herself to Duke Melane, Duke Carlos arrived at her room. He wanted to talk with her about her illness. Karina, who had been in relatively good spirits, felt a flash of panic. Had Dr. Winston told him everything? She had asked him only recently not to tell anyone that she was dying. Once again, Karina felt that helpless sense of betrayal. Let me be clear. I came here to help treat your artist's disease, which is why I pressed Dr. Winston relentlessly about your condition. He did not volunteer the information. And I already knew from the very beginning that your artist's disease is extremely severe, because the Carlos family has kept detailed records on this illness going back generations. We have been patrons of artists for a very long time, and among them were artists who, like you, could create miracles. But your ability, Lady Karina, is far more powerful. According to the records, a creature drawn into existence rarely survives a full day, and there has never been a recorded case of anyone granting life to an enormous monster. So in theory, Lady Karina, your ability approaches the authority of a creator god. Karina was not particularly surprised. If anything, she smiled bleakly, because she had never once imagined her ability could be so great. Overlooked by her family for so long, she had believed she was the most useless person in the household, not even worth being called an ornament. Then, Duke Carlos, do all the artists you know of use these abilities at the cost of their own lives? Yes, as far as I know, every artist with this ability contracted the artist's disease and all of them died before 30. They say such people focus solely on their work and take no interest in life at all. They grow more obsessed the more they paint, until in the end, they use their own flesh and blood as pigment, giving their lives to their art without hesitation. So, Karina, I want to help you. But in order to truly help you, you cannot hide anything from me no matter how small. If you are experiencing any of the symptoms I describe, you must tell me honestly. As far as I know, patients also grow increasingly sensitive over time, and they paint without rest as though hypnotized. This is because they come to believe that the creatures they create are the only beings who understand them, and eventually they treat those creations as their entire world. Karina pressed her lips together in shock. I have every one of those symptoms. As time passes, I not only become more sensitive, I also paint without sleeping or resting, and I can't stop. Because there is no one in this world who will listen to what's in my heart. Before I came here, no one had ever cared how I felt. Only the children I created ever understood me. I was simply so lonely, Karina, none of this is meant as blame. I want you to understand that if you keep running from it, in the end, you're the one who will suffer. If you keep pouring your anger and sorrow and loneliness into your paintings and overlook the people around you who genuinely care, you will regret it one day. And Dr. Winston tells me you have less than a year left. Is that correct? Have you ever thought about giving up painting? I have never once considered giving it up because painting is my entire life. Duke Carlos understood. He himself had poured enormous effort into music since childhood, and the joy that comes from creating something is not easily surrendered. That said, Karina, there is actually something I would like to ask of you. There were 4 children in that house, and only one of them ever suffered. Your brother wants to hold his graduation party tomorrow, so we'll postpone your birthday. Your brother is still so little. He likes your wallet, so why not just give it to him? Your sister is unwell and needs someone to care for her, so skip the tea party and stay home to look after her. And so she became the obedient, dutiful child in her parents' eyes, the unremarkable young lady in everyone else's, and their family became the picture of happiness that outsiders envied. But every bit of that happiness was built on her suffering. No one cared how she felt. No one knew what she loved. And no one even knew she was terminally ill and dying. Eventually, she could no longer bear this family who cared nothing for her, and she left without looking back. She wanted to spend the little life she had left seeing the mountains and lakes she had never seen. The final stop of her life was the house of a fiancé she had met exactly once, at their engagement banquet. All she had hoped for was that he might take her in and give her some remote little cottage where she could die quietly and undisturbed. What she never expected was that this cold, distant fiancé would care for her so deeply. He made her feel loved and treasured, remembered every one of her preferences, and even summoned Duke Carlos, the world's foremost authority on the artist's disease. to help treat her illness and ease her pain. And in order to help Karina, Duke Carlos needed to understand her ability. So he now asked her to paint something in front of him, because he wanted to see what she looked like while wielding her power. Karina did not refuse. After receiving her father's accusatory letter, she had written a letter of her own severing their relationship, and this was the perfect opportunity to paint a portal and send it home. Karina prepared her supplies and began to paint. As her brush moved across the paper, Duke Carlos's eyes widened further and further. Watching her intent expression, the fluid confidence of her lines, and her singular technique, he felt that he was not simply observing a painting being made. He felt as though he were standing inside the scene itself, watching a beautiful landscape being brought into existence right before his eyes. The experience was so extraordinary that even the widely traveled Duke Carlos could not help marveling at it. Karina's talent was simply astonishing. He had no idea how to put into words the passion surging inside him. Then Karina was struck by a wave of dizziness. It was the sign of a body pushed past its limits, but she forced herself onward, determined to finish the portal. A beautiful flute melody rose beside her. It was Duke Carlos. His playing had the power to heal and restore a person's strength. Hearing that clear, sweeping melody, Karina felt her breathing ease at once, and even her body felt lighter. With the support of his music, the portal was completed successfully. Now, if she simply opened that door, she could return instantly to the Count's estate and all its unhappiness. Just as Karina was about to thank Duke Carlos for his help, she found him clutching his chest and gazing at her with an oddly bashful expression. "Karina, I think I may have fallen in love with you." And so a spectacular betrayal descended upon the head of the entirely unsuspecting Duke Mullane. As for Karina, the sudden confession left her completely at a loss, and the expression on her face was the perfect illustration of bewilderment. Duke Carlos realized at once how inappropriate his words had been, and hurriedly changed the subject by bringing up the music. "That piece I just played was improvised entirely from watching you paint. What did you think? Did you like it?" Karina's mouth fell open. That moving melody had been composed on the spot? That was remarkable. Duke Carlos beamed at the praise. "In any case, Karina, if you go through that door right now, you'll return to the Count's estate. Is that correct?" "Yes, all I have to do is open it." Hearing that confirmation, Duke Carlos could not help being awed. This truly does approach the divine. And what on earth are her family thinking? Their own daughter is this extraordinary, and they show her no care at all. They opened the door and stepped into Karina's room at the Count's estate. The moment he was inside, Duke Carlos could not resist a remark. "Is this an unused room? There isn't a single decent piece of furniture here." Looking at the room, unchanged since the day she left, Karina laughed bitterly. "This is the room I lived in all my life." To be fair to Duke Carlos, a young lady's room is usually quite lavish. Ablier's room was like that. Hers had all kinds of lace decorations, and even the curtains were brightly colored. Because I always had to look after my younger siblings, I never had time to visit anyone else's home, but I imagine other young ladies' rooms are much the same. Looking at the dust that had gathered in the unswept room, Karina abandoned the idea of simply leaving the letter there. If she left it here, they would probably never find it in their lifetimes. But the servants were coming and going outside, and it would be a problem if they were discovered. Duke Carlos told her it was nothing at all. He could take care of that. Ever since their daughter ran away, the once loving family had begun to fall apart. The Count and Countess had grown distant and stopped speaking. Abelier became listless, consumed by grief. Pelton hardly spoke at all. And Arrow simply stopped coming home. The maids in the house were suffocating under the oppressive atmosphere. Just as they were wishing Karina would come back and end it all, a beautiful flute melody drifted out of Karina's room. The maids, who had been eagerly gossiping, all began to yawn. Before long, everyone in the house who had heard the music fell into a deep sleep. The one responsible, of course, was Duke Carlos. He had used his music to put the entire household to sleep, so that Karina would not have to worry about being discovered. Duke Carlos asked whether there was anyone she wanted to see now that she had returned. Karina's answer was, naturally, no. No one in that house had ever cared about her. And even though Duke Carlos had already told her father she was terminally ill, Karina knew her father would never believe it. If anything, he would assume she was pretending to be sick to hurt them. Unless she died in front of him, he would probably never feel a moment of regret. And even then, once the regret came, he would surely rage at her corpse, demanding to know why she had never told them she was ill, accusing her of breaking her parents' hearts to the very end. So Karina had long since let go of any notion of family. All she wanted now was to sever ties with the parents who did not love her as quickly as possible. She had spent her whole life living for her family, yielding to the brother who came home once a year, caring for her sickly younger siblings. But now she had decided to say goodbye to the person she used to be. With whatever life she had left, she would live for herself. She would use her incomparable talent as the painter Karina to leave her work in this world forever, to earn her parents' love at an age when she should have been running freely in the sunshine. She had quietly taught herself to be mature. She would step in to help her parents with their responsibilities. She would decline her own tea parties to look after her frail sister. She thought that would make her mother care about her a little more, and make her stern father like her a little more. The result was the exact opposite. Her obedience became something they simply took for granted. You're their older sister. Of course you should look after them. You're home all year and your brother is always away. He's finally home for once. Shouldn't you give way to him? And so, under years of parental neglect, even Karina came to believe that all of it was simply her duty. It was not until she learned she had less than a year to live, not until she ran away and met the man who truly loved her, that she finally woke up. So she wrote a letter severing the relationship between father and daughter, and with Duke Carlos's help, delivered it back to the Count's estate. When her father saw the letter, he did not recognize it at first. He looked at the handwriting and thought it seemed vaguely familiar. It was only when he read the words, "I am ill, so I will not be returning to the estate," that he realized Karina had written it. He had never imagined that after his last letter reprimanding her, she would not only refuse to come home, but would reply in such absolute terms. The letter read, "From this day on, I will no longer live as Karina Leopolder. I will make my name in this world simply as Karina. You will see. The daughter you considered incapable of anything will one day have a name that carries all the way from the distant north to the center of the empire where you live. You always taught me never to bring shame upon the family name, and I have followed your instruction faithfully all my life. So this time, I hope you will remember it too. One day in the future, do not you dare bring shame upon the name I have made. My whole life used to revolve around my family, and I realized none of you cared. Now I have met someone who truly loves me, and I find myself in the middle of a quiet, wonderful infatuation. Do you know? It was only because of him that I finally understood my life doesn't have to be built around my family. He gave me courage and confidence. He let me live the way I want to live. He would never raise a hand to intimidate me, and he would never call threatening to throw me out of the house an expression of love. It was only after meeting him that I learned love is gentle. So from this day forward, there is nothing between us." Reading this far, the Count was furious and cursed Karina for having no gratitude for the parents who raised her. But when he read what followed, the anger in his eyes gave way to shock. I imagine that after reading the passage above, you will be in a rage, and you will call me ungrateful for everything my parents gave me. But let me ask you one question. In all my life, did you ever truly listen to a single word I said? Was I really the good child who never once cried? At those words, fragments of Karina's life surfaced in the Count's mind. In his memory, Karina had always been smiling. He tried to piece those blurred fragments together. He wanted to remember when Karina had stopped crying in front of him. But no matter how hard he tried, he could not recall it. Because it was not that Karina had never spoken to him. It was that he had never once truly listened to what she said. And so years of neglect had turned into sharp fragments that cut her again and again until she bled. One more thing. If you still wish to see me, come to the north, because I will not be returning. As for my funeral arrangements, do as you please." The Count flew into a rage when he finished reading. Cursing under his breath, he barked at the butler beside him. "Contact Duke Mullane immediately and have him send that ungrateful girl back to me at once." "But my lord, winter has already set in across the north. The monsters are appearing in great numbers." "What of it?" "That child has the audacity to claim she has some incurable disease, and to tell us to handle her funeral ourselves. Tell me, is that any way for a daughter to speak to her parents?" The butler hesitated. "My lord, have you considered that Lady Karina may genuinely be ill?" The Count's hand froze halfway to his mouth. He snapped at the butler. Do not tell me even you believe that wretched girl's words. The butler hurried to explain. It turned out that months earlier, one of the maids had heard the sound of vomiting coming from Lady Karina's room. What? Then why did you never report this to me? The butler's face filled with bitterness. I did report it to you, but you were busy with work at the time, and you said Karina was perfectly healthy and there was no need to look into it. You also told me it was not necessary to report such matters to you every time. You said the lady was grown and she would handle it herself. The Count's expression changed completely. Then you should have told me again. Now doubt began to take root in him. Could he really have been wrong? Was Karina truly ill? But if she was ill, why had she not told him to his face? Why hide it? And run off to the north alone? Was she trying to disgrace the family? Still, he did not forget to instruct the butler. Under no circumstances is Abelier to learn of this. She's fragile. If she found out, her body couldn't withstand it. What the Count did not know was that Abelier was already standing outside the door, and she had heard every word. She had never imagined that the sister who always smiled at her had endured so much unfairness at home. She was overcome with regret. She regretted being so selfish back then, so much so that now she did not even have a chance to apologize to her sister in person. All she could do was slump against the edge of her bed and cry. Sister, I was wrong. I really do know I was wrong. And Karina, who knew none of this, was at that moment staring at a battered little bear-shaped purse. It was the only birthday present her mother had ever given her, and it had once been her most treasured possession. She used her power once more, painting a small bird that longed for freedom, and let it follow its own will, and carry away this last tie to her family, to somewhere she would never find it again. With that, there truly was nothing left between her and the Leopolder family. What follows is a tea party turned battlefield without a single shot fired. It was supposed to be a sweet afternoon for Duke Melaine and Karina alone, but Duke Carlos materialized out of nowhere and turned it into an ordinary party of three. Duke Melaine was thoroughly displeased with this man intruding on their private world. Karina had invited Duke Carlos herself, but Melaine was irritated all the same. How could his own best friend have so little sense of timing? So Duke Melaine vented all his frustration on Duke Carlos. Every time Carlos said something, Melaine had a retort ready. What was meant to be a warm, harmonious tea party turned into a full-scale verbal duel. Watching the two dukes behave like children, Karina could not hold back and burst out laughing. And that single laugh made the sky itself explode with color. The two dukes, still deep in their argument, stopped and stared. Karina, why are you laughing so happily? Do you find the two of us that amusing? Karina was still smiling brightly. Not at all. I just think the two of you have such a good relationship. And I love an atmosphere like this. Talking freely over a meal, a table filled with laughter. This is everything I always wished for. And Melaine, watching her happy smile, suddenly found that the infuriating Duke Carlos was not quite so unbearable after all. As the days passed, Karina's condition grew steadily worse. Not wanting to worry the man she loved or the friend who cared for her, she would shut herself away in her room whenever the pain came and endure it alone. Back at the Count's estate, this behavior would never have been noticed. But she was in a ducal manor now, surrounded by people who genuinely loved and cared about her. So when Karina locked herself away, the household staff noticed the moment something was wrong. They found her collapsed on the floor, unable to rise from the pain, and immediately asked after her condition. Karina, unwilling to be a burden to people who were kind to her, forced a smile and insisted she was fine. But the maid insisted on notifying Dr. Winston, because Duke Melaine reminded them of it every single day. If Lady Karina experiences any discomfort at all, you must inform Dr. Winston. Dr. Winston arrived at her room shortly after. After a careful examination, he determined that her artist's disease had worsened again, though fortunately it was unlikely to deteriorate rapidly in the near term. That was the only good news to be had. But Karina did not care about any of that. All she wanted to know was whether she would keep vomiting, because she did not want Melaine to see her suffering and worry about her. Winston told her the vomiting would likely continue, and he warned her seriously, "You mustn't stop eating out of fear of vomiting. Your body right now is like a crumbling sandcastle battered by waves. The moment you stop taking in food, that structure will loosen and collapse. And you must also remember to hold firmly to the will to keep living. You need hope. Those words carried Karina back into her memories. When she first learned she was terminally ill, she had not been frightened at all. If anything, she had felt an enormous relief, because at last she had a reason to escape that suffocating household. That was why she had chosen to travel alone, and to die quietly somewhere no one knew her. But she was different now. Here she had found people who genuinely loved and cared about her, and friends. Here she had her own interests, and goals she wanted to accomplish. She was no longer willing to die. She wanted to fight to live. So she cooperated fully with the doctor. When Winston warned her never to stop eating, and to hold on to her will to live, Karina agreed readily, because there was someone here she could not bear to leave, and friends who truly cared about her. Seeing Karina recover a normal person's desire to live, Dr. Winston found himself thinking back to their first meeting. Back then, upon learning she was terminally ill and dying, she had not shown the slightest flicker of fear. Instead, she had radiated something like release and longing. Even he, a physician who had witnessed countless partings between life and death, could not comprehend it. A person with no fear of death at all, who instead felt relief and freedom. What on earth had she lived through? Fortunately, Karina had rediscovered her hope of living. So Dr. Winston handed the rest over to Duke Carlos, who understood the artist's disease far better, so that he could explain to Karina what she must never do. A few days earlier, Duke Carlos had watched her use the power of miracles from beginning to end, and a question had lingered in his mind ever since. Given the way Karina used her power, her condition was deteriorating at an abnormal rate. According to generations of knowledge preserved by the Carlos family, the reason miracle-wielding creators die young is that they create miracles too many times. Yet even so, people who had used the power far more often than Karina had lived considerably longer than she was likely to. So the purpose of his visit was to ask Karina whether she knew about the absolute prohibitions attached to using the power of miracles. Naturally, she did not. That made Duke Carlos pity her even more. If Karina had not grown up in a household that ignored her, her body would never have deteriorated this badly. If her parents had shown her even a little care and hired her an art teacher, her condition would never have reached this irreversible state. It was late, but Duke Carlos felt she deserved to know. So he explained the absolute prohibitions of the artist's disease. Put simply, the prohibitions of miracles work much like a doctor saving a life. A doctor can treat illness and save people, but his skill has limits, so he cannot save the critically wounded. That is his limit. Anyone who exceeds that limit at will has broken a prohibition. There are 3 prohibitions you must never touch. The first is that you must not violate the laws of nature. For example, bringing the dead back to life, or turning back time to alter what has already happened. The second is that you must not create human beings. Your miracle can create plants, animals, even monsters, but only a god may create a human, and we must never encroach upon the domain of the divine. And the most important of all is that you must never use a miracle to take a life. Because the power of miracles is nearly omnipotent, and that means those who wield it must not do what human beings should not do. Anyone who violates this pays with their own life. So tell me, Karina, have you ever broken any of these? Faced with his question, Karina swallowed nervously, and then, looking distinctly guilty, said she had never violated any of them. But Duke Carlos missed every one of those small, unnatural gestures. Because if Karina had truly broken a prohibition, she would certainly not still be alive. And that left him unable to explain why her condition was deteriorating so quickly. It was precisely because his mind was elsewhere that he failed to notice how Karina's entire body flinched when he mentioned the second prohibition, the one about creating human beings. Had Duke Mullane, who knew her far better, been present, he would certainly have recognized it. Karina had lied again. In the end, Duke Carlos set his questions aside for the moment and offered Karina a method to ease her condition. She should stop painting 1 second before completing a work, because if the painting is never finished, the miracle cannot activate. That way she could satisfy her need to paint, without triggering a miracle and worsening her body. It was, without question, an unconventional approach. Carlos even gave it a name and joked that it amounted to taking all the pleasure without paying the price. If Karina's power itself could speak, it would surely have had a few choice words about the arrangement. Finally, Duke Carlos extended his hand and offered her a proposal. He asked her to entrust her unfinished works to him. He would follow her wishes and make her into a singular, celebrated painter. He would make her name resound across the entire world. so that the family who had once overlooked her could see exactly how extraordinary the plain second daughter they dismissed truly was. Abelier, the sickly younger sister, may in fact owe her very life to Karina. She and her twin brother Pelton were born at the same time. Pelton was born perfectly healthy, while she coughed from the moment she entered the world and required a doctor at her side at all times. Add to that Karina's strange reaction when Duke Carlos mentioned the prohibition against creating human life, and I find myself with a rather bold theory. It is possible that Abelier was dying at birth, and Karina happened to discover it. Because she did not want to lose her sister and did not want her mother to grieve, she used the power of miracles and gave the dying infant life at the cost of her own. That would explain why her condition deteriorated so rapidly, and why even the Carlos family, who had studied this illness for generations, could not account for it. Of course, this is only my own speculation. If any of you watching have a different interpretation, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Now back to the story. Having received her lesson on the nature of miracles, Karina was standing alone in the moonlight thinking of Duke Melaine. He had left days earlier to subdue the monsters rampaging along the borders of his territory, and he had not returned. It worried her. What if something had happened to him? The moment the thought surfaced, she shook her head firmly. He'll be fine, he has to be. To distract herself, she took out her list of final wishes and began writing again. Thanks to Duke Carlos, her wish to make a friend had been fulfilled. Next on the list were giving a gift to the person she loved and embracing the person she loved. But the moment she imagined embracing Duke Melaine, her face flushed, and she waved her hands frantically, trying to chase the images out of her head. And while Karina was locked in combat with her own imagination, Duke Melaine appeared in her room. He had returned to the manor before she began daydreaming. When he knocked and received no answer, he had let himself in. Melaine had come in worried that she might have collapsed. But seeing her blushing in the moonlight, all that worry transformed instantly into overwhelming affection. She really is adorable. Then he heard her mention Duke Carlos's name, and he went rigid. That's not right. That's not right at all. Perhaps this is what love looks like at its best. When you think of someone, they appear before you at once, and the first thing they say is a question about how you are. Karina and Melaine had been apart for only 2.5 days, and yet to both of them it had felt like years. And because of the winter monster uprising, they had very little time together. Within a few sentences, Melaine had to set out to hunt monsters again. Karina could hardly bear it. They had only just seen each other, and now they were parting again. To spare her the sadness, Melaine promised he would return the evening after next. But when he looked up and saw the forlorn expression on her face, he immediately revised it to midday. The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them. The very earliest he could return was evening. Wasn't saying midday just lying to her? But in the next instant, his eyes went wide. Because beneath the brilliant stars, Karina said, "I'll be waiting." Those words worked like a spell. The Duke set out that very night, riding hard toward the monster hunt. His knights, however, were the ones who suffered for it. "Your Grace, you're riding too fast. The knights are having trouble keeping up." The Duke was unmoved. "This is all you can manage? Then I'll lead from the front and you can follow behind me." And with that, he pulled ahead of the entire column. In his mind, he kept seeing Karina in the moonlight, smiling and telling him she would wait. "Don't worry, Karina, nothing in this world is going to stop me from keeping our promise." Before long, the hunting party reached their destination. Melaine listened to the monsters roaring from deep within the forest and ordered his men to make camp for the night. Tomorrow, the creatures who had stolen his time with Karina would pay for it. For the sake of one promise, Duke Melaine set out into the night and fought savage monsters in temperatures 50 degrees below freezing, and he did all of it so that he could put down the uprising as quickly as possible and return, on schedule, to the girl who had smiled in the moonlight and said she would wait. But just as Duke Melaine was laying out the plan for the coming hunt, a Herta walked out of the trees beside them. Melaine was not frightened. If anything, he was pleased. "Excellent, it's come to us on its own. This will move our timetable up considerably." At the Duke's command, his well-drilled knights fanned out and surrounded the lone Herta in an instant. But just as Duke Melaine believed victory was assured, the trapped creature let out a chilling wail. The ground beneath them began to shake, and pairs of glowing eyes materialized out of nowhere. A pack of enraged Herta surrounded Melaine and his men in a matter of seconds. One young knight trembled with fear. "Since when do these stupid creatures know how to call for reinforcements?" He turned a pleading look toward the Duke, who was locked in combat with a monster of his own. Mullane, fighting with everything he had not anticipated this either. Every route of escape had been cut off by the newly arrived monsters. Fortunately, thanks to Karina's help, he already knew where the Herta's weak point lay. His blade drove home, and the creature he was fighting dropped lifeless in an instant. Seizing the moment, Mullane shouted, "Everyone, remember where I struck? Aim for that point, and we'll break out of this easily." But the words had barely left his mouth when an unusually powerful monster appeared silently behind him, and before he could react, delivered a lethal blow. Meanwhile, Karina was waiting out in the snow beyond the city, watching for Duke Mullane's return. She waited most of the day, and what came instead was the alarm signaling a massive Herta attack. Her heart clenched with a sudden, inexplicable pain. Please let nothing have happened to him. While Duke Mullane was away putting down the monster uprising, ambushed and his fate unknown, a vast horde of Herta surrounded the city where Karina was staying. Because the Duke had taken most of the city's elite knights with him when he rode out that night, its defenses were weaker than they had ever been. Against this sudden wave of frenzied monsters, an already thin defensive line was on the verge of collapse. Karina watched from inside the walls, desperate to help. Was there anything at all she could do? Then her eyes fell on her painting case. Of course, she could use the power of miracles. And inside that case was the half-finished Herta. She had stopped painting. All she had to do was complete it, add the color, and give it life. And she could use its strength to hold back the crazed monsters outside. But just as she was about to finish the painting, a worry stopped her. Could one Herta of her own making truly hold back the thousands upon thousands massing outside the walls? Clearly it could not. As she agonized over it, word came from the wall that the gate was about to fall. Karina grew frantic. What was she supposed to do? Then something Duke Carlos had once told her came back to her. Some artists who wield the power of miracles use their own blood as pigment, and in doing so create works far beyond their own ability. So Karina had a reckless idea. If she used her own blood as paint to give the Herta life, would it become far stronger? But Duke Carlos had also warned her, gravely, that doing so would cause severe damage to her body. It was practically suicide. So Karina hesitated, because she had promised Duke Mullane that she would do everything in her power to live. Then she saw the soldiers on the wall locked in a desperate fight against the Hertas, and her mind was made up at once. "I'm sorry, Mullane. I can't stand by and watch the monsters break through the wall. I can't stand by and watch the place we lived in together be destroyed. Since the day I arrived here, you have looked after me and protected me. You taught me what love is, what warmth is. You let me become who I really am. So this time, let me stand in your place. Let me protect all of this for you." Her life became the canvas. Her blood became the pigment. And the last of her remaining time became the price. All of it to create one powerful creature that could drive back the tide of monsters outside the walls. On the wall, the soldiers were reporting the latest developments to the butler. "We've already sent word to His Grace by messenger bird, but there's been no reply. And the number of Hertas outside keeps growing, so the line we've established won't hold much longer." Hearing this, the butler turned to lead Karina away from the danger. But before he could act, a powerful Herta broke through the gate tower and charged inside. The disciplined soldiers immediately formed a defensive line. "It's a monster! A monster has broken through!" To everyone's astonishment, a familiar voice came from behind the creature. "It's me, Karina. Don't be alarmed. It won't attack us." The soldiers stared, thoroughly confused. But Karina had no time to explain. She turned to the Herta beside her. "I need your help. Until Mullane returns, can you hold the monsters outside the walls back for me?" The Herta, being Karina's own creation, naturally agreed. It nodded to her, then turned and leapt from the 100-meter wall, opened its enormous jaws, and hurled itself into the tens of thousands of monsters below. The instant it entered the fray, the Herta displayed devastating power. In the space of a heartbeat, it cut a clean path straight through the dense mass of creatures. Watching from the wall, Karina could not help marveling. It really is incredibly strong. Then all at once, Karina heard a strange voice. "I'm going to kill every one of you." She looked around in surprise, but no one else reacted at all. Karina found it very strange. Was she imagining things? Then it dawned on her. Could that voice be coming from the Herta? Down in the middle of the horde, the Herta was digging through the mountains of monster corpses, searching for something. And as its movements grew faster and faster, the voice in Karina's head grew more and more urgent. Where is it? It can't be. Where is it? There, I found it, so this is where it was. But to anyone watching from a distance, it looked as though the creature were devouring its own kind. Is that Herta eating its own kind? Lady Karina, is it safe for it to do that? Karina, however, was no longer standing there. She was already running frantically toward the Herta because a new exchange had appeared in her mind. It was the Herta speaking to the surviving monsters. I am not like you. I have a master of my own. Not one of you is escaping today, because your bodies contain something my master needs. The moment it finished speaking, the Herta charged the last few surviving monsters, intent on wiping them all out. But just then, Karina arrived on the battlefield and called out to stop it. Herta, let them go. There's no need to kill them all. The Herta obeyed immediately and returned to her side. Once the remaining monsters had retreated, Karina asked the question burning inside her. What were you looking for just now? And what was that about a master? But the Herta had returned to its normal state by then, and it seemed just as puzzled by her questions as she was. Just as Karina was about to press further, a sudden thunder of hooves rose behind her. It was Duke Mullane. He had returned. And the first thing he did was pull her out from in front of the Herta and shield her with his own body. All units, take that Herta. Wait, it's mine! For a moment, the atmosphere between the two of them and one monster grew rather awkward. Karina, what exactly do you mean by that? I mean that this Herta is one I painted. I made it to hold off the horde. The moment she said it, Duke Mullane's face darkened. Didn't you promise me you wouldn't use the power of miracles again? Do you have any idea how badly this affects your body? Karina looked thoroughly guilty and could only mumble, but the situation was so urgent. And Duke Carlos? Did he really have no other solution? Duke Carlos, but I never saw him at all. At that moment, the man in question was just waking from his afternoon nap and complaining to himself. Didn't Karina say Mullane would be back by midday? There's still no sign of him. How thoroughly unpunctual. And so, the instant Duke Carlos woke up, he found himself facing one furious Duke Mullane, one guilty-looking Karina, and one thoroughly bewildered Herta. In that instant, Duke Carlos felt a powerful urge to go home to his mother. The three of them sat in the drawing room in total silence, the atmosphere unbearably strange. One of them was waiting for an explanation. One had no idea how to begin explaining, and one had no idea what was going on at all. In the end, Karina recounted the monster attack from beginning to end, though she deliberately left out the part where she used her own blood to create the Herta, because she did not want to worry Mullane any further. At last, Duke Mullane let out a long sigh. What grounds did he have for blaming the woman who had given everything to hold back the horde? If anything, he believed that had he returned sooner, she would never have been hurt at all. Watching the two of them putting each other first, Duke Carlos could not help laughing. The two of you really are perfectly matched. But back to the point, Karina. You truly can't make the Herta disappear this time, the way you have before. You have no idea. When I saw that thing standing in front of me just now, it very nearly frightened me out of my wits. Karina apologized. I've tried many times, but I can't draw the Herta back into the painting. It's as though it's already slipped out of my control. What I can tell you is that it still listens to me and it won't wander off or attack anyone. Duke Carlos found this deeply strange. It was the first time he had ever heard of a miracle going out of control. Karina, since you created this Herta, has anything unusual happened at all? At that, Karina remembered how the Herta had seemed to eat something after driving off the horde. But then, without warning, a mouthful of crimson blood spilled from her lips. But I don't feel any pain at all. Those were the last words she spoke before her consciousness blurred and she collapsed. Her already fragile body could not hold on any longer. It felt as though a hand had closed around her heart and were crushing it, grinding it until it was about to burst. That closeness to death terrified her beyond endurance, and she wept from the pain. Mullane, it hurts so much. I don't want to die like this. Mullane, it really hurts. It feels like my heart is being torn apart. And Mullane, watching her suffer, could do nothing but hold her tightly against him. In that moment, he hated himself. Why could he do nothing for her? Why could he only watch her endure this much agony without taking any of it from her? Why was he so utterly useless? At last her cries subsided. Her hand slid limply from his face. She had passed out from the pain. Just then, Duke Carlos rushed in with Dr. Winston and immediately pressed an obviously precious gemstone into Melane's hand. This is a Haroon. It only forms inside the bodies of the most powerful monsters. Melaine, give it to Karina at once. It will help her. And it did. As the Haroon drew close, Karina's breathing steadied noticeably, and the agony drained from her face. Once they had left Karina in Dr. Winston's care, the two men stepped outside. In the corridor, when Melaine learned that the cause of her collapse was the Herta, he immediately wanted to destroy the creature. Duke Carlos stopped him. That Herta is a miracle that has already been brought into being, and it has slipped beyond Karina's control. So killing it now will not make her any better. Hearing that, Melaine turned on himself again. If I hadn't come back late, Karina would never have ended up like this. I'm the reason she's in so much pain, and I can't do anything about it. I'm completely useless. As Melaine sank deeper into it, Duke Carlos cut him off. Actually, there is a way to ease her pain. You saw it yourself just now, didn't you? The moment you brought the Haroon close to her, her breathing steadied. So my theory is that the Haroon may be the basis for a treatment for the artist's disease. I've been studying it recently, and I've found that it resonates with my own miracle. The sensation is almost as though it were canceling my power out. On top of that, Karina said before she lost consciousness that after her Herta killed those monsters, it searched their corpses for something, and appeared to swallow it. So my theory is that the reason her Herta slipped out of her control is that it ate the Haroons inside its own kind, and those Haroons canceled out her miracle. But this is all speculation. I need far more Haroons to test it. Melaine grinned. Leave that part to me. Deep winter is nearly upon us, and the starving monsters will soon come in packs. Once they do, the hunt begins in earnest, and the bodies of those monster leaders will hold even larger Haroons. For Karina's sake, I will kill every one of them and bring the Haroons back. The moment Karina broke the prohibition against using the power of miracles to kill, her body began to deteriorate rapidly, and what little life she had left drained away at frightening speed. Fortunately, Duke Carlos discovered in time that the Haroons inside the monsters could ease her symptoms, which was the only reason she did not die immediately. Even so, her condition continued to grow worse. Time passed quickly, and before long winter arrived. Karina lived each day as she always had, doing the things she loved, and Duke Melaine, having experienced the helplessness of holding her while she passed out from the pain, became even more devoted in his care. He supervised her meals every day, and every night he sat beside her until she fell asleep because she was afraid of the dark. One day, as she painted as usual, Karina lost focus for a moment and accidentally completed the entire piece. In an instant, the miracle took hold, and beautiful butterflies came fluttering out of the canvas. She had promised Duke Carlos she would never finish a painting again. But since she had already brought them into being, she decided to let them enjoy a little time before they went. She opened the window and let the butterflies dance beneath the clear blue sky. This really is beautiful. A little while later, once the butterflies had vanished, Karina checked the room carefully to make sure no one would find out. But then she saw Duke Melaine standing below, watching her, and she knew she had been caught. What do I do? From the look on his face, he's clearly angry. She stamped her feet in a panic. What must come comes. Before long, Duke Melaine's voice sounded from the doorway. Karina, you really are? I didn't mean to. I was simply too absorbed in the painting and I didn't notice. I truly didn't mean to. Looking at her cowering there, Melaine could not find it in himself to be angry. In the end, he only sighed. Karina, you know how much I worry about you. I know that if I forced you to put down your brush, you'd be devastated, and I don't want to force you to do anything you don't want to do. But please take better care of yourself, because if I can, I'd like to be with you a little longer. Those words moved Karina deeply, and at the same time filled her with sorrow. Why did I have to meet the man I want to spend my life with? Right at the very end of it? In front of Karina, Duke Melaine always showed his most easygoing side. But in private, he was carrying an immense weight. To ease her condition, he went out every day to fight monsters, all for the Haroons inside them, because Duke Carlos had told him the Haroon was very likely the foundation of a cure for the artist's disease. And every day he asked Carlos for an update on her condition. But on this particular day, when Carlos told him that Karina had deteriorated again, and that some of her painkillers no longer worked, Melaine sank into self-recrimination once more. She's in so much pain, and there's nothing I can do. Duke Carlos could not resist teasing him. Have you fallen in love with Karina? Because I distinctly recall that at your engagement banquet you told me to my face that you found her a nuisance. Mullane stubbornly turned his head away. I simply can't bear to watch someone die in front of me. After Carlos left, Mullane went to the window alone and watched Karina playing with the monster out in the garden, and he fell to remembering. When had he started paying attention to her? He still recalled how much of a nuisance he had thought her when she first arrived. When she produced the engagement papers and asked to cancel, he had actually been pleased, thinking he was finally free of a great burden. But somewhere along the way, he began finding his eyes drawn to her without meaning to. When she was out of his sight, he would worry that she had collapsed somewhere, and his mood would sour. And every time he saw her smile, whatever foul mood he was in evaporated instantly. Sometimes he wondered, if he had spoken to her properly at their very first meeting, would her health be better now? Would they be closer than they were? And if they were closer, would he be allowed to kiss her? Legend holds that at the far end of the sea lies an immense mountain range that the people of the north call the end of winter. That range is deeply mysterious. It is said no one has ever reached it, and no one knows what lies beyond it. Some say it is where the gods live. Others say it is the realm of demons. Still others say the long-extinct dragons dwell there. Personally, I think all those rumors are rather overblown, especially the ones about dragons. And this so-called end of winter is really nothing more than a cliff. Karina, however, saw it quite differently. Whatever people say, I still think the end of winter is a beautiful name. Duke Mullane was surprised. You think that name is beautiful? Of course, because the end of winter is spring. Perhaps that place connects to spring itself. The Duke was stunned. Spring? So it could be read that way. In the north, the end of winter symbolized eternal death, because people believed that if even winter came to an end, then everything in the world would cease to exist. And yet from another angle, within that eternal death lay the promise of spring. Karina, you have such an unusual way of seeing things. I find myself wanting to see the world through your eyes. Through my eyes? That would surely be terribly dull. Dull? How could it be? Your eyes are so beautiful. Everything they see must be beautiful too. Karina had not expected him to say something like that. Those words, so open and so direct, set her heart pounding beyond her control. He truly is so gentle. Then Karina remembered something. Oh, Mullane, I have a gift for you. Duke Mullane was surprised. But when he looked at what she had handed him, he was puzzled. Is this a painting? It's medicine, healing medicine. The monsters have been rioting so often lately, and I worried you might be injured fighting them. So I created this medicine from my imagination. It can heal any wound instantly, though it can't heal a creature whose form is no longer recognizable, and it can't save someone already at death's door. It has no effect at all right now, because I have to finish the painting once I'm home before it fully comes into being. I'm certain this potion will help you. But Duke Mullane showed no delight at all. Instead, he looked at her with complete seriousness. Karina, I know you're thinking of my safety, but I, Mullane, do not need medicine bought with your suffering. Understand this. In my heart, your health matters more than anything else. Karina's condition was worsening. Only moments earlier, the hand she painted with had lost all sensation for an instant. She knew what that meant. Her illness had progressed again. But she had no time to dwell on it, because that night the ducal manor was holding a critically important event, the North's unique Eve Festival. Held at a fixed time each year, it drew representatives of every noble house in the North to discuss the winter monster hunts together. As Duke Mullane's fiancée in name, Karina was expected to attend, so she needed to prepare. But as she came down the stairs, she was struck by a sudden wave of dizziness, followed by a stabbing pain. The intense pain and the weightless vertigo sent her collapsing helplessly onto the steps. Karina recognized it as the sign of a body about to fail. But how could this be? Hadn't Dr. Winston said she had 4 months left? Was she going to die right now? In that instant, a great many thoughts crossed her mind. Should she tell Mullane? He kept insisting she report any discomfort at once, but he had already given up so much for her. Karina knew she was going to die, so she did not want to drag him in any deeper. It would not be fair to him. Yet the pain was so severe that she could not stand. Then it occurred to her, painting. During an earlier episode, She had discovered by accident that using the power of miracles while in pain dramatically reduced it. Of course, doing so was no different from suicide. It was like trading her own life for a powerful painkiller. But tonight's gathering was too important to miss. So Karina decided to do it anyway, because she did not want to become a burden to the man who cared for her in what little time she had left. Karina had 4 months until death, and as time passed, her attacks came more and more often, each one accompanied by enormous pain. It felt as though a 50-ton truck were rolling over her body again and again. During those episodes, all she could do was endure, because every painkiller had stopped working on her. This time, however, she intended to use the power of miracles to dull her own pain, because she wanted to be at Duke Mylaine's side that night for the North's most important ceremony. And the price of that would be more of the little life she had left. Perhaps to us her choice looks foolish. What could possibly matter more than life itself? But Karina believed it was worth it, because she did not want to be a burden to the people who loved and cared for her in her final days. Yet as Karina struggled to her feet and started toward her studio, she ran directly into Duke Mylaine, who had come to check on her. The unexpected encounter left her completely flustered. One look at how pale she was, and Mylaine understood immediately. She was having another attack. He stepped forward at once, swept her up in his arms, and spoke gently. "Don't talk, I'll take you to rest." In that moment, cradled against him, Karina knew. Tonight she would not be attending the Eve festival with him after all. Back in her room, Karina apologized guiltily. "I'm sorry. It seems I've become a burden to you again." Mylaine simply stroked her burning forehead. "Karina, you don't need to apologize. I don't find you a burden. And if it hurts, then cry. Watching you hide your pain like this only hurts me. You don't have to pretend to be strong in front of me. You can be honest with me." Hearing that, Karina thought of her family. Why was it that the people she had lived with for more than 20 years never once saw through the tough exterior she wore, and yet this man she had known for a few months could see straight into the fragile heart underneath? In an instant, every swallowed grievance turned into tears that spilled from the corners of her eyes. Why? Seeing this, Duke Mylaine pulled her tightly into his arms and patted her back with his broad hand. "Karina, cry if you want to cry. In front of me, you can feel whatever you feel. You can be your true self again." Listening to those gentle, sincere words, Karina felt the pain of the attack ease considerably. But she had grown up in a household where she had never mattered, and being cared for so suddenly sent her insecure thoughts spiraling. If she were not ill, would Mylaine still be this attentive? If she were not ill, would they have gone through with the wedding and lived an ordinary married life? The more she thought, the further her mind wandered. When she finally came back to herself, she realized her tears had soaked the formal coat Duke Mylaine had prepared for the evening's banquet, and she began to panic. The Duke told her it was nothing. He would simply change into another one. And because he worried she would blame herself, he went out of his way to explain that the evening's banquet was not important at all, describing the North's single most significant event of the year as nothing more than a casual gathering, where people drank and talked. Karina understood perfectly well that he was only trying to make her feel better. Once he had gone, her thoughts began to wander again. She wondered if she were truly healthy, would Mylaine's feelings for her turn from sympathy into love? Karina admitted it to herself. Over these past months, she had fallen in love with the man who cared for her so completely, but she also knew that being with him was impossible, because she was dying and she could not give him a future. Even so, she could not quite suppress that greedy little hope that somewhere in his feelings for her there was a trace of love. In the end, she lay back on the bed and reminded herself bitterly, "Karina, stop dreaming. He's only kind to you because you're ill. Besides, you're going to die soon. The two of you can never be together." What Karina did not know was that after leaving her room, Duke Mylaine went straight to his butler and instructed him with complete seriousness to look after her and to allow absolutely no one to disturb her rest. He also told the butler to inform every noble house in the north that the Eve festival would be postponed by one day, because from their conversation, he had learned that Karina wanted to attend the festival with him. And to grant the wish of the woman he loved, Duke Mylaine made a decision that flew in the face of centuries of tradition, which meant, of course, that only one person in this story got hurt. Watching the Dukes retreating back, the butler grumbled inwardly, "You open your mouth and declare it postponed, and I'm the one who has to make it happen." Postponing the Eve festival has never once occurred in history. The northern nobles are certainly going to object, and I'll be the one showered in complaints again. This is terrible for my complexion. It seems it's about time I asked for a raise. At last, Duke Mullane confessed his feelings to Karina. He wanted to spend every day at her side. He wanted to spend the rest of his life watching her paint, free and untroubled, in front of him. And he made her a solemn promise. He would bring back every Haroon obtained during the North's joint monster hunt. All of it for her. So he asked one thing of her, that she stay home and wait safely for his return. But Karina's expression only grew bleak because she was afraid. She was afraid she might not live to see that day. And it was then that she suddenly understood. She could not even give him a promise as simple as that. She was truly that powerless. But this was not the time for sorrow. She had decided to spend her last days beside the man she loved most. So she made a request of him. I want to go with you to fight the monsters. I won't get in your way. I'll stay at the very back of the column, and I won't distract you. Even so, Duke Mullane refused without a moment's thought. He knew exactly how dangerous the frenzied winter monsters were, and he was not going to gamble with Karina's safety on the slim chance that nothing would happen. Seeing how firm he was, Karina lowered her eyes in disappointment, but she was not ready to give up. So she gathered her courage and said aloud what she had been holding in her heart. I only want a little more time with you. I want to be able to see you every moment of every day. And besides, if I'm with you, surely I can be of some help. Hearing such open, unguarded words from the usually gentle and reserved Karina, Mullane felt his weathered face flush scarlet. He coughed lightly, forcing a calm he did not feel to cover his embarrassment. Well, I suppose I'll consider it. At that, the shadow lifted from Karina's face and she broke into a radiant smile. Thank you, Mullane. Honestly, the fact that you'd even consider my request is more than enough for me. Looking at that stunning smile, Duke Mullane felt his heart lurch violently. He found himself leaning slowly toward her. But just as the air between them began to blur, his reason won out over his impulse. No, he would not hurt Karina over a moment's recklessness. He needed to leave quickly and let himself cool down. But Karina did not want him to go. She summoned her courage and boldly caught his hand, then said shyly, Could you stay with me a little longer? I don't want you to leave just yet. At those words, Duke Mullane could hold back no longer. He turned and looked at her with open affection. Karina, remember that you provoked me first. And then Duke Mullane kissed the girl he had loved for so long. Faced with that sudden kiss, Karina did not resist. If anything, as though she had rehearsed it 1,000 times in her mind, she answered it eagerly and warmly. A long while later, their lips reluctantly parted. But once the two of them had calmed down, the atmosphere in the room turned strange again, and their thoughts ran in very different directions. Duke Mullane was savoring the softness of that moment. Did we just kiss? And if we kissed, does that mean we're together now? Also, that feeling was extraordinary. Can I do it again? No, Karina needs rest. I mustn't disturb her any further. The Haroon! Karina needs the Haroon for her treatment. Those frenzied winter monsters had better be ready, because I'm going to pull every Haroon out of them with my own hands. While Duke Mullane's thoughts were racing joyfully ahead, Karina beside him was visibly troubled. Has Mullane fallen in love with me too? I love him as well. I love how it feels when he closes his hand around mine. I love the warmth of his palm when he strokes my hair. I love Mullane. I love everything about him. But doesn't that mean I've crossed a line? Wasn't my whole purpose in coming here to find a place where no one cared about me? So I could die in peace? And what have I done instead? I've made an innocent man fall in love with me. No, Karina could not allow Duke Mullane to have feelings for her. She knew far too well how cruel it was to love someone who was about to die. She did not want Mullane left alone to carry that pain after she was gone. So Karina spoke. Mullane, you truly are a very thoughtful man. It was the first time anyone has ever comforted me with a kiss. But thanks to you, I feel much better now. Mullane's expression changed. What? You think I kissed you just now to comfort you? Duke Mullane admitted he had been impulsive. Because from the very first day he saw her, he had been drawn to this runaway girl. In the beginning, he thought she was nothing more than a troublesome burden he had to look after. But little by little, she made her way into his heart. From the awkwardness of the first time he helped her with her hair, to the ease and naturalness it had become, he had grown used to having her beside him every day. He loved her. And now Karina was calling that love comfort. Melaine knew she was saying the opposite of what she felt, but it hurt all the same. Still, he did not argue. He respected every choice she made. So after a brief silence, Melaine finally spoke. Karina, if putting it that way makes it easier for you, then go ahead and call what just happened comfort. But you should understand something, you foolish girl. You have absolutely no talent for acting. The look on your face right now is exactly like a puppy about to be abandoned. All right, go to sleep. I'll be right outside. If you feel unwell, call for me at any time. After Duke Melaine left, Karina lay there for a long time, unable to collect herself. He truly is so gentle. I said such hurtful things and he didn't get angry with me. He was only worried and he comforted me. He knew perfectly well I was lying and he didn't argue. Why did I have to meet him when I'm about to die? In the end, all Karina could do was bury her head deep in the blankets and whisper what she really felt. Duke Melaine, I love you too, but in the end, we can never be together. After the kiss and the comfort of the previous evening, the two of them tacitly behaved the next day as though nothing had happened, and dined together as usual. And Duke Melaine had agreed to let Karina join the monster hunt. Because it had suddenly occurred to him that the Herta she had created had never vanished, so having it guard her would make her absolutely safe. He did attach one condition. Karina had to promise that no matter what happened, she would never again use the power of miracles at the cost of her own life. Karina's expression shifted at once. At the cost of her own life? Did Melaine know the truth about her body? Who told him? Was it Duke Carlos? Hadn't he promised to keep it secret? But she was overthinking it. Duke Melaine still did not know her condition was deteriorating rapidly. He was simply worried that she would damage her body again. That said, Karina really had been planning exactly that. The hunt was extremely dangerous and there would certainly be casualties. So she had intended to use the power of miracles to help Duke Melaine reduce the losses and spare him that grief. But the Duke still refused. He did not want any of his men to die. But he wanted Karina's sacrifice even less, because if Karina died, he would lose his mind. So he warned her with complete gravity. You must live. You cannot leave me alone in this world. We still have to go and see the waterfalls together next spring. That name of mine echoing across the world. In recent days, an unknown painter by the name of Karina had appeared in the imperial capital. No one knew who she was, and no one knew where she had come from. All anyone knew was that she was a genius painter suffering from the artist's disease. It was said that anyone who looked upon her work felt as though they had stepped into the world inside the painting. People could not resist speculating. Who exactly was this painter Karina? Some guessed she was a child. Others insisted she was an already famous painter working under a new name. Amid all the rumors, the Carlos family, the ones orchestrating everything behind the scenes, were willing to bring her paintings to auction and nothing more. About Karina herself, they said absolutely nothing. Even so, the paintings of this unknown artist drew nobles from across the empire, and it became a mark of prestige among the aristocracy to own a Karina. At the Carlos family's auctions, nobles came to blows over her work, and friendships of many years were destroyed over it. Watching from the floor below, Duke Carlos could not help marveling. It seemed he had still underestimated her gift. And he found himself looking forward to something. When Karina's name spread across the continent through the mouths of these nobles, how would the family who once ignored her react? Surely, when they learned that the ordinary daughter they dismissed had become this extraordinary, they would be filled with regret. What Duke Carlos did not know was that when Karina's father heard of her fame, his first reaction was still denial. In his eyes, Karina would always be a disobedient, thoughtless, thoroughly mediocre daughter. He even called her ungrateful for saying something as unforgivable as severing ties with her own parents, insisting it was the reason her mother now spent her days in tears and had fallen ill, which shows just how much Karina had endured, growing up in that suffocating household. Fortunately, this time there was at least one clear-eyed person in the family. Seeing his father's attitude, Karina's eldest brother finally understood why his obedient, dutiful sister had left without a backward glance. Only then did he realize that he, too, had been exactly like his father, overlooking the sister who had quietly given so much for him. Unfortunately, his awakening had come rather late. He was filled with regret that he had never treasured her while he could. And so this time he pushed back. Father, do you truly intend to go on like this? What if this unknown painter really is Karina? Every detail the world has reported about this painter matches her. If you keep denying it, aren't you afraid that one day you'll truly lose her? Will you really abandon your own daughter? Karina's father froze, listening to his son. Something like fear stirred inside him. Fear, yes, not guilt. Because what he was actually thinking was this: if that painter really is my ordinary second daughter, what am I supposed to do? And while Karina's father was worrying about whether his newly famous daughter would take revenge on him, Karina was attending the North's grandest Eve festival on Duke Melane's arm. She was extremely nervous on the way. She had never met any of these northern nobles before, and she was not particularly familiar with northern etiquette. Duke Melane reassured her the entire way, telling her that northern banquets were nothing like the rule-bound affairs of the capital, and that she should simply behave as she would among friends. But when they pushed open the doors of the banquet hall, they both stopped short. There stood Baron Cromber, normally the most casual man alive, dressed to the nines and performing an elaborate bow. "Your Grace, you've arrived. We've been waiting a very long time for you and your fiancé." A vein stood out on Duke Melane's forehead. He pinched the bridge of his nose in irritation. That troublemaker is doing this on purpose. If he makes a spectacle of this, Karina is going to feel guilty about it. But with Karina standing right there, Duke Melane could only swallow his anger and reply, "Baron Cromber, has something wonderful happened to you recently? You're dressed so magnificently, like a peacock in full display." Every word came out through gritted teeth. Baron Cromber seemed entirely oblivious and carried on cheerfully. "Well spotted, Your Grace. Of course I'm delighted. It's the Eve Festival. The wine is unlimited and I can drink as much as I please. How could I not be delighted?" At that, Duke Melane finally understood. The man really had come to enjoy the spectacle of the Duke postponing the Eve Festival. Then Viscount Elier chimed in. "Duke Melane, remind me, which fool insisted on holding this Eve Festival? These banquets really are dreadfully dull." This was getting out of hand. These people were normally famous for being shrewd and diplomatic. Why had every last one of them lost the ability to speak tactfully today? If looks could kill, the two men deliberately provoking him would have died several hundred times over under Duke Melane's glare. But with Karina present, and unwilling to damage the impression of the perfect gentleman he had built up in her eyes, Melane could only endure it for now and settle accounts later. Just as the tension reached its peak, Karina tugged gently at his sleeve and said she would like to greet everyone. Melane objected. "You want to greet these people?" "I really don't see the necessity." Because as far as Duke Melane was concerned, Karina only needed him. He could stay beside her forever without ever growing tired of it. But some people had no intention of cooperating. Baron Cromber raised his left hand high. "Hello there, beautiful lady. I'm Baron Cromber." "And me. My name is Marlene Elier." "Marlene will do. It's a pleasure to meet you. You're far more polite than certain other people." Faced with such warmth, Karina responded courteously as well, and mentioned that Duke Melane had been forced to postpone the Eve Festival on her account, and that she hoped no one minded. She had barely finished speaking before Duke Melane hastily cut in. "Don't worry, Karina, the Eve Festival is just an occasion for drinking. Postponing it doesn't matter in the slightest." Baron Cromber and Viscount Marlene were speechless. "He doesn't even bother preparing his lies, does he? I would love to expose him right now. Let it go. Let him have this. If we dared to embarrass him in front of Lady Karina, he'd absolutely find a way to make us pay for it later." While the two of them whispered to each other, Duke Melane looked around with regret. He had wanted to walk Karina through the hall, but it was far too crowded and noisy now. It simply was not going to work. Before Karina could respond, Baron Cromber bowed again and offered that, given how busy his grace was, he would be happy to show Lady Karina around the hall himself and introduce her to every noble in the north. Duke Melane's face turned murderous. "Absolutely not." Then he turned to Karina with a dazzling smile. "Karina, don't listen to him. I'm not busy at all. Let me introduce you to the northern nobility myself." But "not busy" was a lie, and every one of his subordinates standing behind him was frantically signaling otherwise. Karina looked at him seriously. "Are you truly not busy? Do you really have time for me? I'm rather gullible, so please don't lie to me." In the end, Duke Melane surrendered and admitted he was extremely busy, then offered the absolute maximum he could accept. For the next 30 minutes, Baron Cromber would show Karina around the hall. Even as he walked away, he was still despondent. She didn't even try to stop me. It seems the old saying is true. Beautiful women are the most dangerous of all. What was it that turned Karina into the center of attention at that banquet? Only moments earlier, Baron Cromber and the others had witnessed a masterclass in changing faces. The Duke Mullane, who had been snapping at them one second, turned around the next and became a warm, sunny young man the instant he faced Karina. And after Duke Mullane had been turned down and walked away looking thoroughly wounded, the entire group descended on Karina with their eyes shining. "Karina, you're incredible. How did you manage it? Mullane behaves like an obedient puppy around you. How did you tame that vicious wolf? I've never seen him listen to anyone like that." Karina had no idea how to answer, and she was greatly relieved when a guest interrupted them. "Good evening, Lady Karina. You must be Duke Mullane's fiancé." "We haven't met. I am Count Leonhard." Karina responded hurriedly and then explained, "This will be announced before long, but I'd like to tell you all in advance. My engagement to His Grace has already been dissolved, so please don't joke about it." Now it was everyone else's turn to be uncomfortable. If that's the case, why did His Grace order all of us to send every Haroun collected on this hunt to the north? Exactly. We all assumed His Grace had that particular purpose in mind. Karina was confused. Mullane was collecting them for me. But what purpose are they talking about? Fortunately, Viscountess Marlene Ellier, being a woman herself, understood at once. "Karina, you're not from the north, are you? No wonder you don't know. Haruns are considered very precious here, so people usually give them to those most dear to them, parents or comrades they have fought and nearly died beside. And if a man gives a Haroun to a woman, it means he already considers her his partner." Karina's face went scarlet in an instant. She remembered the first time she'd gone out with Duke Mullane and they had encountered a monster. He had given her a Haroun with his own hands that day. No wonder the soldiers around them had cheered. So giving a woman a Haroun carried that meaning. Had she hurt Mullane yet again? Even so, Karina did her best to explain to Viscountess Marlene and the others that Duke Mullane was collecting Harouns for her only because she had an incurable illness, and the Haroun was the key ingredient in her treatment. But no matter how she explained it, everyone answered her with the same knowing smile that said, "You don't need to explain. We've all been there. We understand." Realizing her explanations were pointless, Karina gave up and sat down to chat with them about northern cuisine. Every region of the north had its own quirks, but when Baron Cromber began mocking certain northern customs, everyone agreed enthusiastically. Especially the way everyone holds up a fan and laughs and chats. Why is there never any actual laughter in their eyes? And if that's the case, why bother laughing at all? It's like taking your trousers off to break wind, completely unnecessary. The whole exchange had Karina laughing out loud. It was the first time she had smiled genuinely in front of anyone other than Duke Mullane and Duke Carlos. Seeing her in good spirits, Count Leonhard beside her offered a word of advice. The Mullane he knew had never worn that kind of expression in front of a woman, so he was certain the Duke would never agree to dissolve the engagement. He urged Karina not to let some misunderstanding cost her the man, because from where everyone else was standing, His Grace clearly treasured her. And Karina understood perfectly well. If she were not dying, she would gladly have accepted Mullane and told him openly how she felt. She would not be saying things she did not mean and pushing him away again and again. Speak of the devil. Exactly 30 minutes later, on the dot, Mullane appeared before them. The group could not resist teasing him. Our chronically unpunctual Duke is precisely on time today. But Mullane ignored them entirely and went straight to Karina, asking anxiously, "Karina, what's wrong? You don't look well." Seeing him made Karina think of what Viscountess Marlene had said about the Haroun and partnership, and her cheeks flushed on their own. She said she was simply feeling a little stifled and wanted some fresh air. At that, Mullane immediately took her hand and announced smugly to the room, "In that case, do excuse us." The others could only nod slowly at his insufferable expression. "Enjoy yourself, then. As if any of us could out-enjoy you." There was a question that had been troubling Duke Mullane for some time. Why did Karina keep insisting she was someone who would soon be leaving? He was certain the meaning behind those words was not as simple as it appeared. With those questions on his mind, Mullane returned to the banquet hall, intending to go over the monster hunt plans in detail with the others. But the conversation kept circling back to Karina, which made him deeply curious. What exactly did Karina say to all of you? For her to hold your attention like this? What else? We were discussing the fact that spring has finally arrived for our Duke. Seeing Baron Cromber's insufferable expression, Melaine had no intention of letting it slide and went straight for a headlock. If Count Leonhard had not intervened when he did, our loose-tongued Baron might well have met his ancestors that night. Count Leonhard took the opportunity to voice a question of his own. He could tell that Karina came from a great house, and yet she did not seem like a young lady who had grown up without a care. Because he had noticed that even when she smiled, there was always a trace of sorrow in her expression that surfaced without her meaning it to. And he had heard her say she was terminally ill. Was that the reason? Duke Melaine was surprised. She told you all even that? Well, since she said it herself, I won't hide it from you. The reason I'm collecting her runes is to treat her illness. Although there's something I can't quite understand. Once we've collected enough Haruns, we should be able to produce a proper treatment and cure her. And yet she keeps talking about leaving. Count Leonhard had something to say about that. Speaking as someone who has been there, let me offer this. A person who has been hurt again and again is often terrified of taking the first step. So sometimes it's worth slowing your pace and approaching her more gently. I can see how much you care for this young lady, but what exactly is this incurable illness of hers? At that, Duke Melaine found he could not explain it clearly. All he knew was that if Karina's condition continued to progress, she would lose part of her body. But what part exactly? Thinking about it now, neither Carlos nor Dr. Winston had ever explained to him precisely what the worst outcome would be. As Melaine sat lost in thought, Baron Cromber's remark gave him an idea. If you don't know what she'll lose, then why not ask someone who has had the illness? Surely that would give you the most accurate information. Someone who has had the illness? Yes, why hadn't he thought of asking him? Melaine remembered a specific man. The last time he had gone out with Karina to buy art supplies, they had met the owner of the shop, a man who had contracted the artist's disease and lost the feeling in his hands. So ignoring everyone's objections, Melaine rode out that very night to find the shop owner and asked him to describe the entire progression of his illness, from onset to losing the use of his arm. But once the owner had finished recounting his experience, Duke Melaine noticed something sharply. The symptoms the man described bore very little resemblance to Karina's. When Karina had an attack, she felt as though a hand were crushing her heart, as though her whole body were caught in a grinding millstone, with pain spreading to every inch of her skin. The shop owner, during his own attacks, had felt nothing more than cramping and aching in his hands. The owner explained calmly that every artist's miracle is different, and so the symptoms of the artist's disease differ too. But when he learned from Duke Melaine that Karina's miracle could create life, he could no longer stay calm. Because as far as he knew, a miracle capable of creating life demanded only one price, and that price was the creator's own life. Hearing that, Melaine shot up from his chair. What did you say? At the cost of her own life? Then why did none of them ever tell me? And why would she lie to me? Meanwhile, Karina had fallen into a very dark place of her own. Her consciousness felt as though it had been seized by something, and she kept repeating the same words over and over. It's almost finished, create the miracle. Melaine, soon I'll have you. She did not care that it would kill her instantly, because what she wanted now was a Melaine like the Herta she had created, a Melaine whose eyes held no one but her, who could stay beside her at every moment. The cause of all of this was a conversation from not long before. It had been a quiet afternoon, and Karina was painting, with Melaine at her side. He had mentioned offhandedly that he would like a self-portrait of her. Karina replied that she would rather paint a portrait of him instead. Melaine had been delighted, since being painted by the woman he loved was a wonderful thing indeed. So today Karina intended to finish his portrait and give it to him as a gift. But as her brush moved across the paper, a voice appeared in her ear. It urged her, coaxed her, telling her to finish the work quickly and use the miracle to bring Melaine into being, so that Melaine would belong to her alone, so that she could possess him completely. And so, little by little, Karina's mind was overtaken by that seductive voice. Her brush moved faster and faster, and she kept repeating the same words. It's almost finished. Create the miracle. Melaine, soon I'll have you. Fortunately, Duke Carlos, who had come to tell her about the auction, noticed something was wrong and immediately moved to stop her before she could add the final stroke. But by then, her mind was entirely under the control of that voice. She fought wildly, straining to break free of the grip Duke Carlos had on her, desperate to finish the painting that would kill her on the spot. In the end, Carlos used Melane's name to bring the crazed Karina back to herself. Once she had calmed down, Duke Carlos asked her exactly how it had happened. Looking at the nearly finished portrait, he felt a chill of relief. Thank goodness he had stopped her in time. The alternative did not bear thinking about. But a question still troubled him. Karina, you said your mind was taken over by a voice. Did you try to resist it at any point? Karina did not know. She could not tell whether she had been unable to stop, or whether she had found a reason not to want to stop. The feeling was exactly like something I experienced once when I was a child. At that, Duke Carlos's expression changed, because those words revealed something staggering. Karina, does that mean that when you were a child, you had already granted life to a human being? She had paid with decades of her life, for 10 minutes of tenderness from her parents. It had happened when Karina was very small. The family had gone out together, and Abelier, being mischievous, had pulled her hand free of Karina's and fallen, scraping her knee. Without asking a single question, Karina's parents laid all the blame on her. They accused her of letting go of her sister's hand. They pointed out that Karina was healthy while Abelier was not. They said she had let go on purpose because her sister had been fussing, and that a child so young should not already have such a wicked heart. And then her mother struck her hard across the face. It was the first time Karina had ever been hit. Karina tried tearfully to explain, but her parents refused to give her the chance. When they got home, she cried bitterly. It was the first time she felt that being born healthy was a crime. Whenever Karina was hurting, she would take out her paper and paint to soothe herself. And it was then that the seductive voice first appeared. It whispered the same thing to her over and over. There are no loving parents in this world for you. So if you want gentle parents, then paint them. Paint parents who see no one but you. And so by the time Karina came back to herself, a pair of parents smiling with perfect tenderness had already appeared on the paper. That was the first time Karina had granted life to a human being. She had no idea then that giving life to a painted person carried such an enormous price. The parents who stepped out of that painting stayed with her for only 10 minutes. And yet those 10 short minutes gave Karina the courage to keep living. When Duke Carlos finished listening to that account of her childhood, he clenched his fists in fury. Now at last he understood. He understood why Karina had completed so few works and yet was this gravely ill. He also could not believe that parents so utterly unreasonable existed in this world. Simply because the youngest daughter was in poor health, the healthy second daughter had to bear everything? If they had paid her even a little attention, given her even a little affection, Karina's condition would never have reached this irreversible point. Looking at the deeply wounded young woman in front of him, Duke Carlos could not help aching for her. He took her hands firmly in his and told her gently that the past was the past. You didn't know back then what it would cost to give life to a person. None of this is your fault. But Karina, from now on you absolutely must never create another miracle. And I promise you this, whatever it takes, I will do everything in my power to keep you alive. So you must hold on to your own will to live. Looking into his unwavering eyes, Karina found her own resolve. Don't worry, Carlos, I want to live. I want it more strongly than I ever have. But just as Duke Carlos was about to breathe a sigh of relief, Melaine returned, having learned the truth from the art shop owner. And the furious Melaine walked in to find Duke Carlos on one knee before Karina, holding both of her hands. It only fanned the fire. A man comes home to find his closest friend, kneeling before the woman he loves, holding her hands. It turned a furious man into something far worse. He had already been angry that everyone had hidden the truth about Karina's condition from him. Now he came home to find his house apparently robbed. It was a misunderstanding. Of course, but Melaine was on the verge of losing control. He looked like a wolf about to take down its prey, glaring murderously at Duke Carlos, who was still holding Karina's hands. But with Karina present, Melaine chose to hold it in for now. He did, however, jealously pull their hands apart and stake his claim in front of Carlos by gathering Karina firmly into his arms. And that was how Duke Melaine discovered the gift she had risked her life to make for him. A portrait more handsome than the man himself. Looking at his own portrait, Melaine transformed instantly from a wolf into an overexcited puppy. It was the first time anyone had ever painted his portrait, and he was genuinely delighted. Watching all this, Duke Carlos quietly exhaled in relief. It seemed the misunderstanding had been cleared up. But just as he tried to quietly remove himself from the scene, Melaine caught him, because Melaine had a great many questions for his dear friend. Seeing Melaine suddenly call him back, Duke Carlos felt a distinctly ominous premonition. Sure enough, the moment they were out of Karina's room, Melaine drove his fist hard into him. You knew all along that Karina didn't have long to live. So why did you lie to me? But Duke Carlos had no intention of explaining much, because he had promised Karina he would keep her illness secret. So he simply said that he had been asked to. And at that, Melaine raised the fist he had only just lowered and drove it into Duke Carlos all over again. Karina had been feeling strange lately. Something about the behavior of both Duke Melaine and Duke Carlos seemed off. She had noticed that Duke Melaine spoke to her less and less. Whenever they talked, he seemed distracted, and a peculiar expression would cross his face. And Duke Carlos was scarcely to be seen at all. The last time Karina had seen him, his face had been covered in bruises, and he had claimed it was simply the unique way he and Melaine communicated with each other. Karina found it odd, but this was between the two of them, and she did not think it was her place to interfere. So she turned her attention entirely to the coming monster hunt, because it might be her last chance to help Melaine at all. Sometimes she wondered, when exactly had she grown so used to a life with Melaine in it? And when the time came to part, would she be able to let go? Just then, Dr. Winston interrupted her thoughts. Karina, it's time for your examination. Let's go back to your room. Once the examination was over, Dr. Winston asked, as always, how she had been feeling recently. But when Karina said she felt reasonably well, the doctor sighed. Karina, there's no need to lie to me. It won't help your treatment. Karina could only tell him the truth. Her condition was not good at all. Her attacks were coming more and more frequently, and each time one struck, she found herself thinking of ending it. But she could not say this to anyone, because lately she had come to feel that she had wronged everyone connected to her, and that she had committed some terrible offense against Melaine in particular. She felt that she was going to die soon. As the pain of each attack grew, so did the sense that her life was reaching its end. An unfortunate development. Karina's condition had worsened again. Her attacks were coming more often, and the pain that accompanied them had grown more severe. Tormented by it for so long, Karina had inevitably begun to think about ending her own life. So she often felt she had let everyone down, everyone who cared about her. They were all fighting for her health, and she was the first one to want to give up. Especially Melaine. If he had never met her, he would not be carrying all these worries. Perhaps quietly disappearing now was the best possible outcome for everyone. Listening to her berate herself, Dr. Winston, sitting across from her, had no idea what to say. Fortunately, a maid appeared and broke the mood. Lady Karina, His Grace would like to invite you to dinner. May I help you get ready? Karina agreed at once. After all, it had been some time since she had seen Melaine. Before she left, she asked Dr. Winston to keep their conversation to himself. A short while later, Karina appeared in the dining room in full evening dress, and Melaine, equally well-dressed, was already waiting. Once they were seated, Melaine gave her an account of what he had been doing recently. And when he had finished, he did not forget to compliment her. Karina, it's only been a few days, and I believe you've grown even more beautiful. All those small acts of warmth successfully dissolved every trace of resentment Karina had been holding over not seeing him for days. At this point, I feel obliged to remind everyone watching. Take a lesson from our Duke Melaine. That is how you find someone, and then you can send me the wedding sweets. Back to the story. After Melaine's remark, the atmosphere between the two of them grew steadily lighter. And when the moment felt right, Melaine asked the question that had been on his mind for days. Karina, is there really nothing you want to tell me? I know being honest with another person isn't easy, so let me be honest with you first. During these days, we haven't seen each other. I have often felt very lonely. So can you tell me, how has your health been lately? Anyone who has faced a terminal illness while being unwanted by their own parents will understand. When you learn your time is short, I believe you would do exactly what Karina did, and hide it, so that in your final months you can finally live as a person, rather than as a patient. But for the people who genuinely care about you, that choice is devastating. The moment Melaine learned the truth about Karina's illness, he was heartbroken. He could not understand why she would hide it from him. And so today he had used the excuse of not having seen her in days to invite her to dinner. And at the right moment, he asked, "Karina, are you all right? If you feel unwell in any way, don't hesitate for a moment. You must tell me immediately." Something about it struck Karina as odd. What was wrong with Melaine? All evening he had been asking about her health one way or another. Had he discovered something? So she tested the waters. "Melaine, has something happened lately? You don't seem very happy." "Yes, something very sad has happened." "Karina, do you know? Some time ago, I came across a very precious flower. And from the moment I saw it, I wanted it for myself. So I began tending it with great care. And then, out of nowhere, I heard that the flower was withering. I went to confirm it, doubting the rumor, only to find that I was the last person to hear the news. So tell me, what should I do? It really is a very precious flower. It's the first flower in my entire life that ever moved me. And now it's dying." Karina understood exactly what he meant. But she chose to feign ignorance. She rose slowly and walked toward him. "If that flower withers, it's all right. There are other flowers elsewhere. You can find another flower you like and tend it just as carefully." "No, you don't understand how precious that flower is to me. There is only one like it in this world, and nothing can take its place." "In that case, is there any way at all to save it?" "The potion. Perhaps the potion I made would work." "Then why don't you drink that potion yourself? If it's a miracle cure, could it cure your illness too?" But Karina told him with regret that the potion she created had no effect on her at all. Melaine could not help feeling deflated. Of course, how could Karina's illness be cured that easily? Was all his hope now truly resting on the Harun? "Karina, there's something else. I've had a gift prepared for you for a long time. It's a necklace made from a Harun. I had the craftsman compress it deliberately, to make it as fine and light as possible so it would be comfortable for you to wear, which is why it took so long and only reached you now." Karina took it and held it against her chest like the most priceless treasure in the world. It was a gift from Melaine, worth more than anything else in existence. "Melaine, thank you. I love it. May I put it on right now?" Watching her radiant smile, Melaine found himself briefly transfixed. He had never expected that a simple necklace could make her this happy. In the end, he took the necklace and fastened it around her neck himself. "Karina, it suits you perfectly." Then he leaned slowly toward her. "Karina, promise me. Never leave me behind." Ever since he kissed her that night, this man had thrown caution entirely to the wind. He no longer hid his feelings for her, and gifts poured toward her like water, until Karina could no longer bring herself to ask him to stop caring for her. And the kinder he was, the more she felt she was failing him. Suddenly, a commotion broke into her thoughts. It was the soldiers responsible for feeding the Herta, bickering over some trivial matter about miscounting its rations. The Herta itself was entirely unbothered, devouring its meal with single-minded devotion. Watching this, Karina could not help smiling. The Herta really does have a comfortable life. But speaking of this Herta, something occurred to her. There was something unusual about it. It seemed able to communicate with other Hertas. Karina had meant to ask it about that in detail, but her illness had driven the thought from her mind. So she decided to go and find out now. But as she turned, a familiar wave of vertigo took hold of her body. Her artist's disease was flaring again. In that moment, she hated herself utterly. Why? Why was her body so hopelessly weak? She hated herself. She hated being ill. Clutching the necklace Melaine had given her, she felt fear rising. Would her condition keep getting worse? Would this kind of pain be with her every day from now on? Until one day she could not endure it any longer, and left this world for good? But she did not want to die anymore. She had come to love this world, because the person she loved was in it. Karina saw a maid running toward her with a worried face. How badly she wanted to tell her, "I'm fine, please don't tell Melaine, or he'll only worry again." But then why was Melaine sitting beside her bed? This man really was growing bolder by the day. And then Karina remembered that as she had been waking, she had been nuzzling against him like a kitten, and embarrassment swept away everything else, including any thought of scolding him for his impropriety. Melaine thoughtfully poured her a glass of water. "You sweated a great deal in the early hours. You must be thirsty. Drink this first and take your time." After drinking, Karina looked slightly guilty. "I fainted again yesterday. It may not be the right thing to say, but..." "It's all right." Melaine cut her off before she could finish. "It's all right, Karina. You were about to say that no matter what, you still want to come with me to the forest, weren't you? Caught out so easily, Karina had no idea what to say. Seeing her expression, Melaine could not help laughing. Karina, you truly cannot hide anything, can you? Everything you want to say is written right across your face. But don't worry, I promised you, and I'll take you to the forest with me. I'll be setting out shortly with the advance party to make sure tonight's campsite is safe. Then he leaned in again, quite deliberately. And once I've confirmed it's safe, I'll come back for you. That set Karina's face burning all over again. Melaine, please stop doing that so casually. But Melaine looked entirely innocent. If you don't give me a little encouragement, what happens when I run out of strength on the road? All right, Karina, I'll see you soon. Wait for me at home like a good girl? Watching him go, Karina felt as though she were dreaming. What exactly are we now? He confessed, but I never actually gave him an answer. Still, this feeling is so wonderful. Karina's artist disease may finally have found a glimmer of hope for a cure. Today was the day the hunting army set out, and everyone in the manor was rushed off their feet. Duke Melaine had left early, with the advance party to clear any threats from the night's campsite. Karina, who traveled with the main army, was placed by her escort, Sir Graydon, not in a jolting carriage, but on the Herta, which offered both comfort and unmatched security. And to ensure her safety, Sir Graydon had a yellow scarf tied around the creature so it could be told apart from the other monsters. Before departure, Sir Graydon repeatedly instructed the Herta, "Do not move too quickly and do not join any fighting while you are carrying the lady." The Herta simply stared at him, and then ignored him entirely. Sitting on the Herta's shoulder, Karina finally asked the question she had been holding on to. "Herta, you came out of my painting, didn't you? I'm curious. How is it that you can stay alive without consuming my life?" The Herta thought for a moment, then answered haltingly, "Because I ate the core that can take the place of my master's life." Karina could hardly believe it. The core the Herta meant must be a Haroon, but why could a Haroon stand in for her life? Carrying that question with her, Karina set out on the monster hunt. Meanwhile, Duke Melaine had already cleared out every monster around the knight's campsite, and had even ordered his men to wash away all traces of blood from the fighting. Karina would not have minded the blood, but he wanted to give her the best possible surroundings. The one disappointment was that the monsters they had killed contained no herons at all. That left Melaine faintly irritated, because he knew Karina did not have much time. Her body now was like an hourglass full of cracks, her life draining faster and faster. He had to hurry, and gather as many Haruns as he could, before her body gave out entirely. But for now, he had to ride back the way he had come, to meet the woman he could not stop worrying about. When the column entered the forest, the Herta beneath Karina suddenly grew restless. She noticed it at once, and she understood. Its nature had been suppressed for too long. At the ducal manor, the Herta had not been allowed to roam freely, and could only move within a designated area, to avoid property damage and unnecessary injuries. Now that the Herta had returned to the forest, it was like a fish returned to the sea, or a child returned to a playground. One wants to swim freely, the other wants to run wild. But Karina looked at the long column, and the wagons loaded with supplies, and sighed helplessly. There was simply no way to make the army move any faster. With no other option, Karina asked Sir Graydon, who was leading the column, for permission, saying she felt somewhat stifled among the ranks, and wanted to ride ahead and see the scenery. Since Duke Melaine had already cleared the monsters along the route, and since Karina had a powerful Herta protecting her, Sir Graydon agreed. The moment the Herta received Karina's permission to run, it shot out of the column like an arrow from a bow. Sitting on its shoulder, watching the scenery rush past, Karina broke into a rare, delighted smile. It was the first time she had ever felt this kind of freedom. And beneath her, the Herta let out an exhilarated roar that echoed across the vast forest. And so, woman and creature raced through the trees, speeding toward that night's campsite. Before long, they came upon Duke Melaine riding back toward them. Melaine was a little surprised, though not exactly puzzled. "Karina, didn't I tell you to stay safely with the main column? It seems you couldn't resist again," Karina explained herself. "I could feel that the Herta wanted to run, and I love this feeling, like riding a horse. So we went a little faster than we should have, but it was genuinely wonderful." Looking at her glowing smile, Melaine quietly took off his own coat. However wonderful it is, you still have to look after yourself. The winter wind here is very cold. And if you're interested in riding, I could teach you." Karina laughed happily. "Do you mean it? I thought you'd refuse." Seeing her so delighted, Melaine could not resist teasing her. "Are you really that interested in riding?" "I am. It happens to be one of the items on my list." "Your list?" Melaine was puzzled. "What list is that?" Karina answered with unmistakable reluctance in her voice. "It's the list of final wishes I made for myself when I finally gave up on my family and decided to leave home." She had wanted to strike back at the family who had ignored her before she died. She had wanted the whole world to know her paintings. She had wanted to paint a great many landscapes before the end. And she had wanted to travel with the Melaine she loved, and eat together every cake she had ever wanted to try and never had. And then to raise a big dog together. And finally to marry Melaine and give him a child of their own. A child to whom she would give, without holding anything back, every bit of the love she had been denied as a girl. But none of that was possible for her now. She could not even say the words, "I love you." Dying as she was, she could only be like a soaked rat in a sewer, peering through corroded iron bars at the couples laughing together in the street above, imagining with envy a happiness that could never be hers. So when Melaine asked what was on her list, all she could do was shake her head in silence and tell him the wishes did not matter, that she had only written them down for fun. Seeing that she did not want to discuss it, Melaine quietly changed the subject. "Look at you. Why are your hands so cold? It's my fault. I didn't think it through. I should have given you gloves before we set out." Feeling the warmth spreading through her hands, Karina could not resist rubbing them against his. "I don't feel cold at all, but your hands really are very warm. By the way, Melaine, this is the first time I've been to this forest. The air here smells wonderful." Melaine's expression softened with affection, and he laughed. "Karina, your painting supplies are still back with the column you left behind. So if you want to paint, you'll have to be patient a little longer." Karina was startled. "How did you know I wanted to paint? Am I really that obvious?" Melaine simply brushed her cheek gently. "Didn't I tell you? Whatever's in your heart is always written plainly on your face." Hearing that, Karina felt an inexplicable sadness. Why was this man so attentive to everything about her? And the more he was, the more she had to push him away. "Melaine, I can tell you one of the wishes on my list. I hope I can see you happy." Melaine was puzzled. "See me happy? What do you mean?" "By happy, I mean I want to see you marry and have children." "Wait, marry whom? Are you telling me that the person I marry and have children with in that wish isn't you?" Karina turned her head away miserably, unable to answer. And Melaine told her exactly what he felt, without a trace of hesitation. "Karina, I know you're running away because I can see it. You always try to pretend you don't know how I feel about you. So let me tell you clearly. From the moment I fell in love with you, I decided that for the rest of my life there will be no one but you. I will never love anyone else, and I will never marry anyone else. The one I love is you, Karina, no one else. Karina, I love you."